a few minutes to welcome our two guests, Scott Lay and Beth Smith. Scott Lay has served since 2006 as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Community College League of California, which is the nonprofit association serving California's 72 community college districts in education, leadership development, district services, and government relations. He joined the league as an intern while a student at UC Davis in 1995 after serving as legislative chair of the California Student Association of Community Colleges. Scott attended Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, and he credits the faculty members at Orange Coast and the community college system generally for providing him the skills and knowledge needed to earn both bachelor's and law degrees at UC Davis. Thank you for joining us today, Scott. As president of the statewide academic senate of the 112 community colleges in California, Beth Smith represents 50,000 college faculty members who teach approximately 2.5 million students. Beth is a math professor at Grossmont College, where she is known as a student-oriented faculty member. Beth served as Grossmont's Academic Senate President from 2003 to 2007. And she has been actively engaged in working with academic senate issues at the state level since 2007. She has served as an area representative to the statewide senate, treasurer, vice president, and is currently the president of the statewide academic senate. So please join me in welcoming Scott Lay and Beth Smith.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to be here. It's a beautiful day, beautiful campus. We're really glad that we could join you for this conversation today about roles and responsibilities and issues that are possibly affecting our ability to do the best we can for students. So I'm going to let Scott give a word of welcome as well, and then we'd love to find out who's here today, so if there's a way to kind of go around and have folks introduce themselves just so we get a sense of who's here.
Well, it is nice to be back here. You know, you've been in the system long. You actually know almost all these buildings. So, any place where there can be a meeting, I think I've been in now. It's nice to be back in this beautiful room. So, with that, did you want to just kind of pull administrators? So, board members. Keeping the Brown Act good here. Faculty. Classified staff. And most importantly, students. Great. That's good. I'm in trouble now. Administrators. Well, thank you so much. And what we're going to do is start off with the presentation. This is a standard presentation that I've given a few dozen times and several times with Beth over the last year. The Academic Senate and the League developed this presentation, which hasn't changed much. So some of you may have seen it before, although every time we go through it, we have kind of revelations that do come about. But, oh, that's why this is the way it is or should be. It was understood that after the implementation of AB 1725, which I'll talk about, it was very important to have the two organizations representing the district governing boards and CEOs and the academic perspective of faculty at the statewide level. It's important to speak with one voice and provide one set of answers. And beyond this presentation, there are a lot more examples. I think they're both on our website and on the Academic Senate's website that you can dive into. We'll try and hold questions simply because we find that oftentimes the question is, oh, let's answer the next slide. So let's try and get through this presentation. It'll be about an hour. Then we'll have a Q&A. We'll see how many of the issues. I know that there was one agenda that breaks out issues. We may be able to get through some of those just in the presentation. We'll see kind of a check-in of where we are on answering those issues after that initial discussion following the presentation. So note that the slide title is Participating Effectively in District and College Governance. There is nothing known as shared governance in the law. We've always used participatory governance when talking about it because shared governance can lead to misinterpretations. For example, we couldn't share the governance on whether this room is too hot or too cold. We'd come up with different perspectives. We might delegate a committee, and somebody at the end of the day is going to have to make a decision. So even though, I think on one of the agendas it says shared governance, we're going to be talking about, and we're going to be encouraging you to talk about participatory governance today, because it's about ensuring that those affected by decisions have an opportunity to participate in the decision-making process. So AB 1725, more generally, was not just about governance. It was a wholesale modernization of California's community colleges. You think back to our origin, where we come from? Where community colleges come from? The K-12 school districts. So we emerged from the K-12 school districts a little over 100 years ago when the legislature initially authorized K-12 districts to offer post-secondary education courses. Then we emerged as our own districts a couple of decades later. Then you had the master plan in 1960, the creation of the Board of Governors in 1967. Then we jumped forward into the 1970s when you had the institution of collective bargaining, and then Prop 13 in 1978. Those major changes happened. The creation of the state board, the institution of collective bargaining, the taking away from local governing boards a lot of policy-making authority because of Prop 13. All of those policy changes happened, but the system was really still the system that emerged from the K-12 school districts way back at the beginning of the 20th century. And so there was a series of reports that said, you know what, this system grew. It's the workhorse of California public higher education. In the 1960s, we were already 2/3 of the public higher education students, a number that continues to approximately this day. But we hadn't really been modernized. And so that was what AB 1725 was really trying to do, was modernize California's community colleges. And if you look at the vote on AB 1725, which I know, at various points, different constituencies, use AB 1725 as a curse word, but recognize that the system reached agreement on this legislative package as reflected by the votes in the state legislature. In the assembly, 74-1. Those of you that remember Congressman Tom McClintock, now a congressman in Northern California, he was the one no vote in the state assembly, and in the Senate, 38-0. You don't see votes like that very often in Sacramento. There were 2 infusions of funding, and then the legislature kind of forgot about this law, which they should have been increasing our funding steadily toward the rate of student reimbursement that California State University gets. But the early 1990s recession really kind of ended that commitment of the legislature. Components of AB 1725. Priorities in the mission. And I always have to somewhat giggle at this because anytime the legislature talks about priorities for community colleges, it's about, let's add more. They don't like to say, focus, focus, focus. There's one debate going on about adult education right now, but in the general credit world, it's always adding more. The last was in the 1990s, adding on economic development as a top-tier mission. We saw this in the budget debate the last few years where the legislature didn't say, get rid of recreational classes. They said, workload reduction should be in areas outside of transfer basic skills and career technical education. But AB 1725 did try to say that transfer basic skills and career technical were the top priorities. In governance, the state and local delineations, I talked about that creation of the State Board of Governors. That's when we split off from the State Board of Education. Well, not really until AB 1725 was it clear that the job of the State Board of Governors is to do as little as possible in terms of interfering with the operations of local districts. The language is, to the maximum extent feasible, responsibility should be left at the local level. Decision-making is what we're talking about mostly today. Program-based funding. You know, if you ever want to take on a little research project or just want to read about the history, going back and looking at the bill, AB 1725, and I think FACT has it posted on their website, on its website, AB 1725, FACT would probably, they would probably pop up. But if you look back at what we were trying to do, it was really to improve the quality of education for our students, the quality of services. Stuff that we're finally getting back around to today. But if you look, program-based funding, the compact of the legislature, which they broke after 2 years, was you give us money, we're going to increase the percent of credit hours taught by full-time faculty. We're going to decrease the counselor-to-student ratio. We're going to increase the number of library books. All of those qualitative improvements were included in AB 1725, and unfortunately the legislature got distracted. For those of you that watch that movie about, we talk about squirrel. It's a joke we have in our office of a squirrel. It's kind of the legislature. You know, they like bright, new, shiny things. And that's why we lost on that component of AB 1725, which I believe has set up some of the tensions that we have to this day. That the tensions that we find in the government's realm are a lot about that broken promise in terms of the investment the legislature is going to make in our colleges. Related to faculty and staff, again, this is a professionalization. We're sick of being high schools with ashtrays. And so it was how do we professionalize, make the quality, increase the quality of community colleges, but also answer the difficult to resolve question of are we K-12 schools or are we higher education? And so we try to find that sweet spot in between the two. We repealed the credentials, so no longer did you get a lifetime credential to teach at a community college like you did at high school. Understand, more in line with higher education, it's about a realm of minimum qualifications that are set at the statewide level with some discretion left to the local level. Extension of tenure, creating a system of evaluation and peer review. If you think of the K-12 system, particularly at that time, it was about an administrator reviewing a teacher. And so we were moving more into a peer review system, which is similar to the traditional Western European university system that our university system is based on. Administrator contracts, allowing districts to engage administrators in longer-term contracts, and staff development and diversity goals. Why? Well, I already mentioned we want to take the ashtrays out of high school. We wanted to be something different. Now, as with most reform efforts, we wanted to increase the support of the legislature for investing in the system. You don't get money for free in Sacramento or Washington, D.C. You have to tell the legislature, this is what we're going to do. And AB 1725 created a very specific mechanism by which the quality would be improved through increased investment. I've already talked about moving from K-12 toward higher education, and we should probably change that word as I think about it, because I think we're proud of that in-between role that our community colleges have. Developing a more unified system that we can have 72 districts with 112 colleges, but we can also speak with one voice in Sacramento through our chancellor, who's hired by the Board of Governors. And this concept of institutional renewal, that these are living organisms that we constantly have to invest in their renewal, in professional development. One of the biggest shames in the last 10 years was the state walking away from investing in faculty and staff development, something we think that we may be able to get into this year's budget. There's a bill moving to the legislature to renew that commitment because you have to constantly upgrade the currency of both faculty and staff on the matters under which responsibilities fall at the college. So let's move into governance. This is our common definition. Participating effectively. And I hate reading the slides and I'm not going to read all the slides, but sometimes you have to do it to highlight certain words. Participating effectively in district and college governance is shared involvement in the decision-making process. Participation, shared involvement, process. Very important words and phrases. Doesn't apply total agreement. Use my analogy of is it too hot or too cold in this room. You know, colleges will never have unanimity on any issue. You know, name an issue and you'll find somebody that has a different perspective than other people. That's the nice thing about the diversity of our institutions. At different times, we're going to look to different people or constituencies in seeking that input, because it's about who is being affected by decisions. And at the end of the day, there is a final decision maker. Now, under state law, it is the local governing board. They're the fiduciary, and if you're a voter in a district, you know, that's who you're entrusting your tax money with. And so that's why the governing board at the end of the day has the final decision, although that decision can be delegated. It most frequently is delegated to the college president in a college like Pasadena, or a chancellor in the Los Angeles Community College District, but it can be delegated to other groups as well. It can be delegated to anybody. That's within the governing board's power and authority. Why do we have participatory governance? These colleges have an immense wealth of knowledge and history in them. If I became a college president and I walked on campus, it would be pretty stupid of me to not seek out the history, the wealth of knowledge that is on the campus. If I come in and say, and I had a friend do this, and he went on to be a very successful college president. He came in, and like his first weekend, he came in from out of state. Like me, he has a legal background. He came in and said, well, best practice is to have all student services under one roof. And like he came out with like a memo the following Monday. Now, what you need to know about that college is there are ocean views from certain buildings. So sometimes it may not even be about what is in the best interest of students or the institution, but there is a history there. There was a seniority process as to where the departments went and those sorts of things. So knowing that and borrowing on that knowledge is huge. There's also subject matter knowledge. If we're going to do, let's say we're considering, I don't know if you have smoking on campus or not, but let's say we're considering a smoking ban on campus, we've got, it'd be great to bring in people from our nursing department or other subject matters that are similar to that because they have the subject matter knowledge. And we become effective spokespeople for the policy that we might develop. That's part of the commitment to implementation. If we're involved in a process, we can become champions of the decision made by the process. Now, this system of California's community colleges has over 500 senior administrative positions. And way back in 1725, it was known right away the best way to find the future leaders is to give them an opportunity to lead. And you do that through creating opportunities to lead in the decision-making process, committee membership, that sort of thing. Promotion of trust and cooperation. This is always a tough bullet point because oftentimes, like I know here, when we come down to do presentations, and sometimes, there's a simple answer to a problem, to a decision, but it's not found unless you have that conversation. Who's been part of a process at times in higher education where it came down to one word? Whatever we do, we're doing mission statements of colleges. If you just have a war of memos, you're never going to come to resolution. You need to have a process where you can bring about that trust and cooperation, and somebody says, oh, I got it, and we can resolve these challenges. And in doing so, in theory, there is less dissent. Well, it would be false of me to give the values without the challenges, Because there are many. Okay, so the first time I was involved in participatory governance, I was a student at Orange Coast College. I was working with EMT at Children's Hospital of Orange County, and I got involved in student government. And the first committee I was asked to sit on was the student health committee, because I was wearing scrubs, literally, because I was just coming from my shift. Well, the main subject matter of that first meeting was birth control for women. I'm not going to go into my personal background, but I wasn't all that experienced with birth control for women at that point. And so often you have these committee processes, and it's based on who is available, not who is best prepared to discuss the subject matter at hand. Everybody in this room has a full-time job. Students have full-time jobs. Being a student, being a family member, being a community member, board members have full-time jobs, even if they're retired. Part-time faculty have like 3 full-time jobs in many cases. And you have to understand that that's really difficult in trying to make decisions quickly in many cases. When you have people that are having a hard time, we talk about calendaring the committee process to death or calendaring it to death. Here's an example. The legislature in the current is reviewing the budget right now. There's $100 million for student equity in that budget. And it's tied to a student equity plan that has to be submitted like November 18th or something this fall. And I've been meeting with the Department of Finance on this issue, and we want that $100 million. It'd be great to help start making progress on that achievement gap. But I'm having to explain to them, well, the budget won't be done until mid-June. And then you really don't get the governance process starting again until mid-September. And developing a student equity plan inherently involves student policies related to student success. And so you have to go through a governance process. I don't think we can do it by November 15th or 18th. The people in Sacramento are kind of like, well, why not? And that's one of the challenges of this process. We rarely have a governance process that goes year-round. It can be very hard to align calendars, and it can require considerable time. Now, another challenge is shared accountability. Now, this is usually measured on the subject matter at hand. Everybody wants to be on the building committee when you pass a bond. Nobody wants to be on the budget committee in the last 5 years. Nobody wants to be responsible for those decisions that are made in those tough committees, the prioritization. Okay, the new faculty hiring committee may be a real popular one, the reduction one is not. The program consolidation one is not. Because I don't want to go back to my department and be responsible, which brings up another point, and that is, who am I when I'm involved in the governance process? Let's say I'm a political science faculty member. Any openings? Political science faculty member. I'm a member of the union, I'm a member of my department, and I'm a member of the academic senate. And I'm sent to a committee. And let's say it's on faculty hiring priorities. And I get there, who am I representing? Now, I'm representing the academic senate in that. If I was sent by the union and it was part of the negotiations process, then I would be representing the union. Who do I see most often? My colleagues in the political science department. And what do they want me to do? They may not have the same priority list that the academic senate has at hand hold. And that can be really difficult. What hat are you wearing at a given time? And at the end of the day, that decision is going to be made, and it may not be what the process led to, or what you believed the process led to. And we'll talk more specifically, Beth will, about when the decision can be made outside of the recommendations, particularly on the 10+1 that we'll talk about. one very important word on this slide, and that's goodwill. We're all here for one reason. The reason I'm here today, I got on a plane last night and came down, was for the students and community of Pasadena City College. Not for my paycheck. None of you should be in here for your paycheck because you're angry, although you may be. The reason you're here is for the students and community this institution serves. And we've got to keep that in mind when we're trying to solve these educational problems. I used to say there are plenty of other jobs out there if you're not here for that reason. I stopped saying that the last few years. I guess things are picking up. I can start using that line again. But it's true. The reason you are at Pasadena City College is the students and communities served, each and every one of you. So, in law, there are 3 tiers of law. You have the state constitution, that indelible document that we amend every election through the initiative process. But that's only amended by the voters, right? The state constitution. Then below that you have codes, like the education code, the health and safety code, the fish and wildlife code. That's where laws adopted by the legislature, and in some cases by the voters, but mainly laws adopted by the legislature are put. The education code is about this high if you have the annotated version. If you've got the unannotated version, it's about that thick. It's like really thin paper. Lots of laws in there. So in education code 70901 and 70902, you find the part of AB 1725 relating to participatory governance. And what it says is there are minimum standards. Included in the minimum standards is participatory governance. Does anybody know what minimum standard is? That is the bar set by the State Board of Governors that says you can't fall below that and still get state funding. So this is actually a very important law that this process works and is implemented and used on our campuses. Also, other minimum standards are you have to get an annual audit, you have to maintain accreditation. And I pause on that word because the Board of Governors is not policing participatory governance. They're not going around saying, is this college, having, is everything going through the governance process? But the accrediting commission is. All of the standards, all of the detail of what Beth and I are talking about today are assumed to be incorporated into the accrediting commission standards. And, there were 2 main issues, and remain to be 2 main issues at City College of San Francisco. One was financial, and second was governance. It led to a lot of other collateral things, but the common themes all came down to this 2. They've made a lot of great progress. Beth and I have been there a couple of times. A lot of great progress on the governance piece, on making progress on the finance piece. But don't think that this is just kind of a nice process to have. It's not something that we do just because we want to do it. It's taken very seriously. So local boards have to provide policies that provide faculty, staff, and students the right to participate effectively, there's that phrase again, in district and college governance. And there's a special role for the academic senate to assume primary responsibility for making recommendations in the areas of curriculum and academic standards. That's the education code. One step below that is the Title V Code of Regulations. That's where regulations adopted by the Board of Governors, which go into further detail, are placed. And that's what Beth's going to start talking about now, because that's where you find the specific detail about that special role of academic senates. And then I'll come back and talk more generally about that faculty, staff, and students' right to participate effectively, that more generic first provision of AB 1725 guidance.
Thanks, Scott, for that background and history. It's always interesting to find out where we've been so we know where we're going. I would love to also reiterate the importance of goodwill. I think there's There's nothing more important than knowing that everybody really wants to find a good solution to a problem when you're sitting down to try to find a solution. If we're all problem solvers at heart, which I hope we are as leaders and in our respective roles at college, it's really crucial that we bring that sense that you want to find a solution to the table, because then the rules and the laws and everything else just give you the parameters within which you can find good solutions. So I hope we keep that at the forefront of what we're doing. So in the regulations then, we start to find out about academic senates. We are named in Ed Code as well as in Title V. So the governing board has to have some kind of policies for the delegation of authority and responsibilities to the academic senate. And hopefully that's happened here. Typically everybody looks for those policies connected to Title V section 53200, right? 53200. 52.
5320.
Yeah. I can't see it. Okay. So let's find out what those academic and professional matters are, because they define that in the law and it's in Title V. So now let's talk about really some more specific information that helps us get out those roles. So these are commonly referred to as our 10+1. And so we'll go over the 10 and also the +1 and see a better scope of what's under the purview of the Senate. Clearly, degree and certificate requirements are there. If you're trying to put together a new program, or what the standards are, the courses that are packaged together and the degree, all of that falls to the faculty. Curriculum, including the establishment of prerequisites and placing courses within disciplines. This is a huge process, and it's all under the purview of the faculty to develop the content of those courses, to figure out what the students need to have as skills before they get there. What kinds of knowledge and hands-on skills should they have before they take that next course in a sequence. And then placing courses in disciplines is that part of our curricular process that identifies which faculty have the right background to teach the content in this course. That's all based on faculty-to-faculty work and faculty understanding of what the MQs are in an area and what the content of a course requires. So this is very much within the purview of the faculty. Grading policies, again, whether you have a big process for how a student earns an incomplete in a course and then satisfies that incomplete, whether you have plus or minus grading, and what those standards are and what those options are for faculty. All of that falls to faculty to determine and to set up regarding their colleagues and the options that their colleagues may have for determining student progress in a course. Educational program development falls to faculty, and this one is kind of an interesting title, because just about everything we do at the college is an educational program. So that means faculty are going to have a role in all kinds of program development at the campus. Not just an honors program, not just a distance ed program, but if you have a program for financial aid, you need to have faculty involvement in that, because that's an educational program. So this idea that a program is strictly the geology program or the sociology program or your PE program is a little bit short-sighted in terms of what the faculty role is overall in an educational program development process. So I'm sure you can think of lots more examples of the types of programs that you have or that you might develop in the future, and faculty need to have a role in that at the very beginning in the development of those programs. Standards regarding student success and preparation also fall to faculty, and again, this is a big umbrella. There's a lot of stuff that falls under student preparation and student success. That could be everything from orientation and assessment to how students meet prerequisite requirements. It could fall to tutoring labs and, just everything on your campus may be involved in furthering student success. It should have some basis in furthering student success. So what is the faculty role in all of that? How does your academic senate become involved in those processes? And that link from a faculty member serving on a committee or a task force back to the senate is also really crucial to define. So all of those ideas that fall under the Senate's purview really mean that they're under faculty purview, and the faculty has decided that they're going to work through their academic senate to make sure that those practices are approved and then communicated to the board or the board's designee in an appropriate way. So here's the rest of the 10. Number 6 is about district and college governance structures, especially related to the faculty role. So this is another place where faculty can be critically involved, and especially the academic senate. The senate needs to be included if you're talking about shifting a governance structure and then looking for how that affects faculty. Now, faculty don't determine administrative structures, so let's be clear about that. But if you are affecting the way faculty might have to report to someone or how faculty structures may work in terms of just trying to facilitate communication and so on, it's really a good idea to talk to your academic senate about that. Get them involved, let them develop a plan, let them communicate how that might facilitate the best kind of communication and best reporting structure for faculty. Number 7 is faculty roles and involvement in accreditation processes, especially in the self-study development and those annual reports, which are getting to be more of a headache, but at least we know they're coming now. We can prepare for them a little bit better. But faculty need to have a role in that accreditation process. It's absolutely crucial that they're involved in 2 important ways. They need to have huge involvement on the campus, co-chairs of standards, co-chairs of editing teams, co-chairs for development of the process and the timelines for getting the self-study completed. But here's the other way that's really crucial for faculty to be involved in accreditation, and that is to have them participate on visiting teams. So not only participate at what happens here, but get out and go visit and be part of the peer review process at other places. And that means that faculty need to be recommended through the president's office, and they need to be supported when they go out on those visits through substitutes and whatever else may encourage their success when they're on visiting teams. So how those faculty roles in the accreditation process are delineated and established need to work through the Senate. Then policies for professional development also need to work through the Senate. This is a huge part of student success. Even if you didn't have the other list of student success options for participation by the Senate, faculty professional development alone is enough to engage the Senate. What are the opportunities? How are those going to be structured? What can the Senate do to provide that? What kind of opportunities do you have off campus as well as on campus? Now, there may be a role for the union here too. Anybody here from the faculty union? Great, thank you. For those of you that are union reps, there's some crossover sometimes. There's some opportunity to collaborate on these things, because a union may negotiate how many days of professional development you need, or hours, or some other structures regarding professional development. But that content of it needs to fall to the academic senate, because that is an academic and professional matter. Number 9, processes for program review fall to the academic senate. And this ties in with the other one in the first 5 about educational program development. Now on this part of the 10+1, you get the other part of program development, which is program assessment and program review. So while you have a huge scope of educational programs, that that means your scope of program review has to match that. So if you don't have program review for your honors program, but that's a program that you have developed through your educational program development process, then you have a gap to close, okay? If you have other programs that you created, for example, your athletic program or something else, and that's an educational program, that's in the best interest of students and in particular student athletes, is there a program review process for that? Well, that should go through the academic senate as well. There needs to be a loop closed in terms of not only development, but review of programs. And then number 10 is one of the ones that is really very crucial in a number of instances because there's sometimes confusion about number 10. And this is the one where faculty and in particular academic senates are involved in creating the processes for planning and budgeting at the campus. This is really important. It's about developing processes for planning and budgeting. Planning and budgeting go together, so that's why they're teamed up in number 10. But there are a number of plans at your campus. How many plans can you guys think of that you have here? Think of one. What do you got? Student equity plan. Scott mentioned that one. What other plans you got?
Student success plan.
Student success plan. What else? Facilities plan.
Educational master plan.
Educational master plan. Great. EEO plans, diversity plans, the old matric plans. You may have a plan to go out to get a new bond. You may have all kinds of plans. Plans you even haven't thought of. A staffing plan. All of those plans need to have engagement of the Senate. Those processes are what the Senate can work on to help facilitate the engagement of faculty, the timeline. You know, are these plans all being accomplished during the summer? What gets done during the summer, what gets done during the academic year when the faculty are around? Can be engaged. Who should be involved? How are those folks appointed to be involved? What does that planning process look like? What does that budget development process look like? Really critical to remember that these are processes that we're creating through this participatory governance process. And then there's this category of +1. It's this kind of catch-all that if there are additional areas where faculty should be involved or it seems appropriate to delegate that work to faculty, the governing board can do that. So that +1 exists. Some colleges use it, some don't. It just kind of depends on what comes up, what situations arise, and how work may get delegated. Because all of this that we're talking about here is about appropriate roles and responsibilities. And if you get a better sense of the role and whose job it is and what their responsibilities are, then you get a better opportunity to actually accomplish some work and finish some projects and make some recommendations to the board at the end of the day. So what we're trying to figure out here is who gets to delegate to whom. So if the board would like to delegate more work to the Senate, and you guys already got 10, I don't know why you want 11, but you know, if the board wants to delegate more work to the Senate, they can. And then that would be something else for the Senate to work with the board on making those appropriate recommendations. So, question for all of you. One of the 10 areas of academic and professional matters is processes for institutional planning and budget development. Does this regulation relate to institutional plans and budgets themselves, or only to the process by which plans and budgets are developed for presentation to the board? So what does this refer to? And if it's not clear, you better make it clear. So which part is the faculty role? Being no one interested in jumping in on this, let's clarify. The faculty through the Senate get to help create the process. Okay? It's like they're creating a machine. You're going to put the inputs in here, you're going to crank it out during September and October, the recommendation's going to go to the Senate in January, at the end, by March, we're going to have this total recommendation. Okay? At that point, that recommendation goes to the next level. What happens beyond that point is in the hands of the board, or the board's designee. The Senate does not get to decide what the outcome of the process is. What they get to do is develop the process and ensure that the process works. In fact, everybody on the campus has to help ensure the process works, whether you're a student, or whether you're classified staff, or faculty, or the board members. Everybody has to want that machine to function. It'd be like buying a car. Everybody agreed this was the right car to buy, but then the car doesn't work. Okay? Then that doesn't help us at all. We have a car that doesn't work, it's not going to be able to get us to the destination. So everybody has to agree to the process to make sure that we can get to the outcomes that need to go forward and become the recommendations to the board or the board's designee. So everybody got that? Because that's a big one. Lots of people around the state want to hold on to everybody's right to be involved in the outcome. And that's not necessarily where you hold on to it. You hold on to it through the process, the creation of the process, and the fulfillment of being a participant in the process in the way it was designed. Okay? But can you hold it, or is it really? Because we may get it. The next slide, there's some more good stuff coming up. All right, so another part of the Title V regulations after the 10+1 were defined was that there had to be a way for the Senate to communicate with the board and for the board to understand how the recommendations were coming to them from the Senate. So the regulations define a concept called collegial consultation, or this idea that the board will consult collegially with the Senate. And there are two ways for this to occur. And these are defined in the regulations, so it's not like, you guys could make this up at your place and we can do something different at my campus. We get two options. So the board can rely primarily upon the recommendations of the Senate in all of those 10+1 areas, or the board can reach mutual agreement with the Senate in all of those 10+1 areas. And what happens around the state is that boards have assigned rely primarily or mutual agreement in different ways to those 10+1. Sometimes the board says, we want to have mutual agreement on all of them. That's what's at my campus. The board said mutual agree on all 10+1. At other campuses, the board has said, we're going to rely primarily on the Senate for those first 4, and then all the rest we want to have mutual agreement. So the board can make that determination. So what is it here? What are you guys? Mutual agreement on all 10+1. Okay, good. Because that's an important foundation to understand. That if that's what you guys have at this place, then you have already defined an important part of your participatory governance process in the 10+1 areas. So mutual agreement. Okay, so we'll stay focused on that. Okay, who decides which of the two processes in the regulations, rely primarily or mutual agreement? The board. And the board has already done that. You guys have a policy, yes? That defines all that? That's great. Really good to have a policy on that. I think CCLC has been a great advocate in that area for encouraging all the districts to make sure you have a policy. Must a local board select? No. You can do anything that works for you. So if in the future you decide that mutual agreement is something you'd like to revisit and maybe rely primarily on the Senate in some of those areas, you guys can do that. So I'm going to go through rely primarily quickly. You don't have that here, but just so that you understand what is occurring at other colleges and districts. So if you're talking to your colleagues around the state or your neighbors, they may have a different structure there. So you may not get the same kind of examples or models you might be looking for because of the way they're structured. So if the governing board has decided to rely primarily upon the Senate in all the 10+1 areas, then the recommendations of the Senate will normally be accepted. That happens pretty routinely. And they're only rejected when there are exceptional circumstances or for very compelling reasons. And that's another big part of Rely Primarily, is to understand what those exceptional circumstances may be when the board may have to reject a recommendation that comes from the Senate. And if the board decides not to accept that recommendation for those compelling reasons, then there needs to be something back to the Senate in writing about that, which only makes good sense because the Senate has done its due diligence in trying to help the board, and the board has now chosen not to accept that recommendation for what must be some very compelling reasons. Then that rationale needs to go back to the Senate. Now, if you have mutual agreement, which you all do, so let's go through this very carefully, make sure everybody has an understanding of what's in the regulation about mutual agreement. And that is that if agreement is not reached, then existing policy remains in effect, unless there's exposure to legal liability. So that would mean that the district, the board would have to be sued, or there's threat of a lawsuit or something for some legal liability, or some substantial fiscal hardship. Now, there were some very difficult fiscal times over the last few years, and so there were some very challenging decisions made, and it was very difficult in some districts, but there still should be a very good understanding about the fiscal situation before the Senate even gets involved in making a recommendation, or you try to reach mutual agreement. That should be part of the parameters right up front, that you can't be designing this kind of a building when the budget is only for this kind of a building. Don't set up the whole group to fail, so that mutual agreement would have to be overridden. So if there are compelling fiscal reasons, and you know that ahead of time, please, please, please communicate. That's part of goodwill. Coming to the table, wanting to find a solution given the parameters that you have. Now, if there's no policy in place, and you're trying to come to some agreement because you need a new policy, then you want to make sure that you still try to reach mutual agreement. You do everything you can to get there, and you make that good faith effort first, but the board still may act for legal, fiscal, or organizational reasons in the event you didn't already have some kind of a policy in that area. So again, the more communication you can have up front, getting these groups to try to find agreement together, looking at all the ways they need to be involved, let's set them up for success. Let's not set them up for failure. That's what mutual agreement can be all about. And in some ways, I find mutual agreement very compelling as a way to go. My colleagues that have relied primarily would say, well, don't you want them relying on the Senate in all these areas, relying on the faculty? Yeah, I do. But you know what makes this work so much better is when we all agree. And if we start out with that sense, we're going to try to get to a place where we all can agree on this. We're going to take a recommendation to the board that has everybody in agreement already. Phew! We've just saved ourselves a lot of heartache and, challenges and so on. So I do find very compelling reasons for mutual agreement. Sometimes it's challenging because you do have to agree. But you guys, that's setting up an opportunity for success. So think about it that way. Think about, gosh, by the time we get this figured out, we're going to be able to send something to our board members, and they can feel so confident that everybody's already agreed. If the governing board chooses the option to rely primarily on the advice of the Academic Senate in any of the 10+1, is the board required to accept the recommendation of the Senate? No, not even when it has to rely primarily. There are still opportunities for the board not to have to accept the recommendation of the Senate, but it should be in very rare instances of legal or fiscal or very compelling reasons for that, and then it needs to be written and shared back with the Senate. So I think I just told you what exceptional circumstances were and compelling reason. And so we'll go to the next one. All right, so here's mutual agreement. So this is for you guys. Your governing board chose mutual agreement, and that's going reach a written agreement, here is a really good word, the part written, not just a hallway agreement, but a written agreement, with the Senate in any of the 10 defined areas of academic and professional matters. When may a board act if it is not able to reach mutual agreement? Yeah, legal, fiscal, organizational, right? Those are the matters. But again, if we know that up front, that those are the parameters, then let's get our homework done and figure out how to come up with the best possible agreement we can get, given that those are that's the situation that we're in. Which is better for local senates? Rely primarily on mutual agreement. Either one. They're both good, they both work. It just depends on your culture, depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it is at the discretion of the board. The board is never prohibited from acting. So just so you know, they are the decision makers, and they have to make decisions at some point. That curriculum packet needs to be approved, budgets have to be approved, plans have to be approved. All of that stuff has to get done. The board has to make decisions. So figure out how to help the board be successful in doing its job. What is the best timeline for getting input, having resolutions through the Senate or review by committees so that you can get the information to the decision makers in a timely way so that they can do the job they need to do. That's going to help all of us be more successful. Exceptional circumstances and compelling reasons versus compelling legal, fiscal, or organizational reasons. To me, I see all of these as being kind of the same thing. If there are some reasons that are really going to be crucial to the outcome of this decision, then let's get that information ahead of time. If it's something new that's come up, because those things do happen, like you do all your due diligence, and then at the end there's something that kind of blindsides you, that can happen. Something could change. But for most of us, we know what's going to happen through the whole year. We know what the calendar year looks like. We know when the Senate's going to be meeting. Let's try to find a way to work within all of those parameters so that we don't get blindsided at the end. Or somebody wants to just pull a trigger and say, well, for organizational reasons, we're not going to approve this. Well, we should have known what those organizational reasons were ahead of time so that we could have figured that in, like you were thinking about a reorg, or you were going to downsize or upsize or whatever it may be. All of that stuff should be worked in. A couple other provisions for academic senates. Some of these are from Title V and some of them are from Ed Code. And while Scott was mentioning the overall structure, the legal structure of the Constitution up here, that's kind of the top, and then you have Ed Code under that umbrella, and then you have Title V under that umbrella. It's important to know that Title V has the weight of the law behind it because it comes from Ed Code. So that layer of law is really important to understand that while some things are in Ed Code, we have important elements in Title V, and all of those are really crucial for us to follow. And underneath that comes your actual local district policies, because that's where you implement all of that law locally. So just keep that in mind too. Curriculum committee. You guys have a curriculum committee here? You already have one? Well, good. Then you don't have to worry about the first one, because you already have it. It's already been established by mutual agreement of your administration and your Senate. But if you were a new college coming about, then you would want to establish your curriculum committee this way, by meeting Title V requirements. Administrator retreat rights. This is something that's in the law part, the Ed Code part of our laws and regulations, which says that if administrators are going to be able to retreat to the classroom, that you need to be able to work that out with your academic senate. So that's an important feature of your roles, faculty roles in governance. If you think about administrative retreat rights, then the Senate obviously needs to play a part in determining how that will happen and under what conditions and criteria and so on. Equivalencies to minimum qualifications. This too is in Ed Code, and faculty need to take the lead role in determining equivalencies equivalencies to MQs. So if your faculty have not already been engaged in that equivalency process, I encourage them to do that ASAP, because you need to have all of that established. That is a faculty job to do. They're the ones screening those faculty hires. They're the ones setting up the job announcements and the how you meet minimum quals, and then any further qualifications that those candidates must have. So they have to be involved in determining equivalencies. Faculty hiring is the same thing. Any faculty hiring processes need to have the Senate engaged. The Senate has to determine what that process looks like for hiring faculty. Now, clearly, there's going to be a role for EEO, or there's going to be a role for some other aspects of your structure in getting those people actually through the hiring process. But the faculty need to be engaged in that. What kind of interviews, what kind of materials you want submitted, how are we going to prioritize which faculty we want to hire. All of that is a key role for the academic senate. Now, faculty wear two hats at all times. They're members of their senate in the overall sense of being represented by their senate, and they're also members of their union. Even though they're not serving as a union rep, they're still members of their union. So faculty wear two hats at all times. Sometimes it's hard to separate those two hats. Which one am I wearing today, and which part of my dual role as a Senate member and a union member is going to take precedence in this situation. So it's important for the Senate to work with the union, figure out which areas where they overlap, or where there might be some gray area, so that they can actually team up to come up with what's in the best interest of both sides of that faculty's work life, their working conditions, but their academic life as well. Those things overlap and so need to be agreed upon together. So there's all kinds of specific examples, but faculty evaluation and the tenure process are two big ones where we really need to see the Senate and the union work together. And hopefully that's happening here. There's some really wonderful models for that around the state, and the state Senate's been working on that as well. So I'm going to turn it back to Scott to let him talk a little bit more about the roles of others in participatory governance.
Before I get to that, jumping back to that previous slide, I realized that one of the things I usually talk about in the initial overview of talking about the history of maybe 1725 coming about when it did, and I talked about Prop 14 and this reconciliation of fewer decisions were able to be made by local governing boards. Similarly, on the collective bargaining piece, that we had to formalize the academic portion of policy development after collective bargaining was instituted in the 1970s, signed by then Governor Jerry Brown. We had to, because no longer could administrators or the board just sit down and have a casual conversation that might affect terms and conditions of employment. So a lot of, as Beth mentioned, a lot of the things that we talk about, a lot of the difficult issues I know you're facing here are in that overlap area. And that's one of the reasons that a formalized governance process was created to parallel that dealing with terms and conditions of employment. Now, if we jump back to that top level, that ed code, we talked about in the first provision was that faculty, staff, and students have the right to participate effectively. So that's kind of the, on those matters having a significant effect. So that's your starting. So if you think about it, if we did a little flow chart, you start off, you say, does the decision have a significant effect on faculty, staff, and students? If yes, then we're going to enter the governance process. Then we look at 10+1 and say, is it a subject matter for collegial consultation, mutual agreement in your case? If yes, then we're looking for a special role from the academic senate. If no, there's still kind of that question of, for all, for faculty, staff, and students, does the decision being made have a significant effect on them? And I think some of the issues that you're facing might be on that point where you go and you say, well, that's not on 10+1, but we still have an obligation to seek input from faculty, staff, and students. And as I mentioned, for faculty, it would be through the academic senate. And we move on to staff. Now, the good news is we only have one slide on staff. The bad news is we only have one slide on staff. But this sets forth the general arrangement you would have both for faculty and staff in terms of the boards have an obligation, and the board has adopt policies that provide staff the opportunity to participate effectively in district and college governance. And that's by developing recommendations that have or will have, or processes for jointly developing recommendations that have or will have a significant effect on staff. So first, who's a staff member of Pasadena City College? I think a lot more hands should go up, right? I mean, if every couple of weeks a check pops into your bank account, you think to yourself, well, hey, I'm a staff member. And that can create some confusion. Generally, we're talking about classified staff in this case. Now, there is a provision in law that says that when you are seeking input on policy having a significant effect on the staff, you first have to ask or give the opportunity to the exclusive representative, CSEA, in many cases, to provide the feedback, usually the largest exclusive representative. Do you have a classified senate here? So, and classified senates either work in parallel with the exclusive representative, or in many colleges, the exclusive representative has delegated the classified senate on most issues that don't have terms and conditions, and in many cases, there's an overlap in leadership, and it works out okay. There was a period of time where there was more animosity between the two, but I think that the legislature said the first priority has to be given to exclusive representatives. Some of that animosity is reduced. And the reason is, in many cases, the rationale by which we determine something has a significant effect on staff, it inherently is the terms and affecting terms and conditions of employment. So if we say, does changing the withdrawal date have a significant effect on staff? Yes or no? Sure as hell do if you work in A&R. They're like, well, we're going to get crushed, and it's going to affect staffing, and we need to add staff. Well, you can think, oh, wait, that also does affect terms and conditions of employment. So that's one of those we would understand. So we're going to add a new program. We're going to add a new international program with Brazil, a soccer team that announced a great season last year. Does that have a significant effect on staff? Sure it does. What about adding going to plus and minus grading? That's one we probably would say, there may be one computer person, programmer, but much of that is done off campus now. It probably doesn't have a significant effect on staff. Now, there's a word in here that is a challenging word, and that is reasonable. What is reasonable? It generally means there has to be given an opportunity to collect feedback. There needs to be some sense that feedback has been considered. So an opportunity for the affected constituency to speak at a board meeting. It means that you can't simply, at a board meeting, add a new agenda item and say, staff, hey Joe, you're the representative from CSE, are you okay with this? That wouldn't be reasonable consideration, because no individual that is a president or representative can make a reasonable response on the spot. And so, Beth was talking about this and talking about the process and the heads up, and so much of this is that going back to goodwill and thinking out ahead. It's about planning ahead and then tying back to your planning documents the decisions being made and getting general agreements that, okay, so we have budget ranges the next few years of adding 3%, 5%, 7%. We know what our faculty hiring priorities are going to be in advance. And on the other side, contingencies if things go downhill. And so we can come back to our agreements instead of having every decision be one that launches a whole new decision-making process. Does that make sense? So, again, every reasonable consideration on those matters that have a significant effect on staff. Now, for students, we have that same general provision, but we actually have a list. Now, this can be confusing because this is not a collegial consultation list. This is not a mutual agreement list. This is an every reasonable consideration list. But in the regulatory process, and I frankly think it was just the former CalSAC, which I was involved in, was long after I was, well, not that long after I was involved. I think they had a Me Too moment, the regulations development, was, well, the Academic Senate has a list, we want a list too. But it shows us some of the examples of those things having a significant effect on students, and it wouldn't be a surprise. Going to plus or minus grading has a significant effect on students. In fact, if you can see, those items that are red are overlap items with the Academic Senate's 10 plus 1. So the students have 9 plus 1 plus 1. The math people are going, yeah, you went to law school. But 9 plus 1 plus 1. So we have those 9 specific. We have 1 general as number 10. And there's a specific provision that says that students have the right to give input on policies and procedures pertaining to the hiring and evaluation of faculty, administration, and staff. Now, sometimes I see cringing, depending on relationship with student governments, I'll see cringing like, oh my God, you gotta have like students on all of our peer review committees. That's not what this says. This is back to policies and procedures, similar to the budget process that we talked about before. So, how do we reconcile that? We just had that list, we had that overlap. So, if something's 10 plus 1, do I have to listen to anybody else? Yeah. If it has a significant effect on staff or students, we're going to give staff and students every reasonable consideration. And frankly, if it's a mutual agreement, we're using one of those exceptional circumstances, compelling legal, fiscal, organizational reasons, and the staff and students say, yeah, this is the right thing to do, and the Senate was a little uneasy with it, that might be a factor that the decision maker could use to say, yes, other people found this to be a compelling fiscal, legal, organizational reason. But we do give greater weight to the Academic Senate. It is our obligation. So you would have to say, oh no, we totally get the Senate's position on this from an academic perspective. We're going in a different direction because we tried to reach mutual agreement. We didn't. But we're doing it for compelling fiscal, legal, organizational reasons only. So you have to give greater weight to what the Senate perspective is. Do these regulations have the force of law? Well, we talked about laws, the education code, regulations. I talked about minimum standards by which the Board of Governors can say, okay, we're going to have to turn off this funding spigot because you're not governing right. That's not going to happen. So what ends up happening? Well, I mentioned the accreditation issue, which, frankly, before City College of San Francisco, it was like, oh, it's in the standards, but they're never going to get down to that level. And then they got very specific down into that level and talked about CCSF and 55 committees, and they couldn't really make any decisions. And that was used as one of the major reasons behind the revocation of accreditation, which is pending in the courts. So it does have a force of law. But what happens in trying to resolve it locally? And I know there's a question that many of you have asked. Well, the other possibility, you can write the Chancellor's office, and some colleges have done it. The Chancellor's office, number one, is their legal department is a lot smaller than it used to, and I think their ability to respond has just been significantly minimized. Colleges bring us in, we make written determinations sometimes, and in the worst case scenario, you end up in court. And let me just pause a moment. I do know that you have a pending legal issue relating to the calendar. That is an issue that's being considered whether or not it's a collective bargaining issue, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to jump in because that's kind of a separate conversation in participatory governance. But what does happen is an academic senate could take, or the students, or or the classified staff could take the college to court. And we have an example of that. And it's a good example because, frankly, it was a gray area issue. It was a college in Northern California, and they were switching from a faculty department chair structure to an academic dean structure. And the question was that on that bullet point that Beth talked about, was that governance roles for faculty? And frankly, it was somewhat of a gray area issue. The league wrote an amicus, they call amicus curiae briefs, a friend of the court brief when you get to the appellate level. We wrote one on the college's side, the academic senate wrote one on the other side, and frankly, it could have gone either way. And at the district court level, the judge found for the college, and then it went up to the appellate level. The academic senate president got a second mortgage on his house to help fund it. And at the end of the day, the court upheld the trial court ruling and found for the college. Nobody won anything, except for a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted money. A college president who was chased out of state, who incidentally was a past statewide academic senate president. That's one of those things of, like, our roles change through our career, and we've seen this actually quite a bit over time, and going both ways. Sometimes, administrators go back to the classroom and become, some of the most challenging to the administration, and vice versa. So we have to solve these issues to the best of our ability on campus, because the penalty, or the fix, if you will, to a violation of participatory governance in the courtroom is like a Brown Act violation. Okay, you didn't do this process right, go back and do it over again. You need a better paper. Because, as Beth pointed out, at the end of the day, if it is an issue of significant importance to the college, and they can fit into that compelling legal, fiscal, organizational structure, as long as they listened and kept a paper trail, then they can make the decision. And unless it's one of those major types of decisions, they don't end up in court. So it really is incumbent upon us to figure out how to solve these issues on campus. And it comes back to that goodwill and communications. I mentioned the Board of Governors, the Chancellor's Office it's basically half the size it used to be, and so it's not stepping in and really kind of policing participatory governance on our campuses. You have a summary chart, and let me, before Simon runs out, let me just point out, I didn't cover on the issue of students. Who is the students? Who are the students that you're consulting with? So we know we have to, on staff, go to the exclusive representative. We know on faculty, we're going to the academic senate. The students would be your student government, your ASB, ASG, not your student trustee. Your student trustee is there to be a board member from the student perspective. And in a case where you have a student trustee that's also student body president, which happens, you have to understand that they can't wear both those hats in the boardroom. So you can't say, okay, we're making a decision right now. Have students been consulted? No, students haven't been consulted. Well, Simon, how do you feel about this? I love plus and minus grade. That doesn't work, because if he was wearing both hats, he'd have an obligation to go back at least for one meeting with the student government to get input. So I know this is really small, but you do have it in your packets. That flow chart. Does the decision have a significant effect on faculty, staff, and students? If yes, then that is going to go in the governance process. Then, is it an item we find on 10+1 for the academic senate? If yes, then we go into collegial consultation. In Pasadena's case, mutual agreement. If no, then it has a significant effect, and we're going to seek out, we're going to deal with that through our normal college governance process, perhaps our college council, or some planning and budget council, one of those types of committees. And at the end of the day, and if that doesn't happen, it's not 10+1, we're going to give every reasonable consideration to the decision being made. So with that, I think it's time to move into some Q&A. And I think there's a microphone over here.
Hi, my name is Dan Haley. I'm the treasurer of the Academic Senate. Part of the reason we invited you here today is we are trying to resolve a number of shared governance issues without going to court. And what we are running into is we're supposed to come to a mutual agreement, we're not coming to a mutual agreement. Status quo is not being kept. The administration is making changes that affect students and faculty, and we're wondering if we have any loopholes here. I'll give you an instance, the calendar issue. At one time, a few years ago, we had a calendar with the winter session. The administration proposed changing it to eliminate winter session, not just cutting the classes, but just eliminating it for now and forever. The students were opposed to it, the faculty were opposed to it. We did not come to mutual agreement. The superintendent recommended to the board of trustees that it change to eliminate the winter session, and it did. So status quo was not kept. There were no compelling financial reasons or organizational nature reasons. So we're wondering what requests we have. It seems like this sort of governance here is out the window.
So let's walk through our flow chart perspective on this. I want to clarify that in pending an equal matter, participatory governance is not a subject matter. Is that correct? In terms of conditions issue only.
Is that because of the book code? Is that what you're saying?
Right, right. That, I mean, there's been, yeah.
I thought you said you were going to.
Well,
The book code was in there twice, but two separate rulings in the past 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant to go into, but that flow chart, the first question, does it have a significant effect? Yes. Then you go to your 10+1. So let's use the block scheduling issue, which is a parallel issue, but not one that's currently subject matter. So you come forward, you say, okay, does that have a significant effect on faculty, staff, and students? Yes. Then, okay, now we go to our 10+1 list, right? Now, where would we find it on 10+1? There's a very good question. Is block scheduling, education program development, and standards or policies regarding student preparation and success? And that is one of those kind of grayer area issues.
On another one might be, just to add in another thought, because one of the things that happens on block scheduling is the way that the curriculum can be delivered in that particular time frame. And often, what we have recommended at the state level is that curriculum committees actually identify courses that can be taught in a reduced time frame. And so if you're going to talk about like a winter intersession or a block schedule or something where you're going to change the way the content is delivered, that needs to have some engagement from the faculty perspective through the Senate. So while it may not say it specifically in one of the 10+1, what you're looking at really is the faculty members' ability to successfully deliver the content to the students and the students' ability to successfully learn that content in a different kind of a time frame. So the faculty should be involved, the Senate should be involved in that. Now, how that plays out, it may turn out to be that some courses work, some don't. It may turn out to be that some programs are very excited about alternate scheduling. But it's the way that the content of the course is delivered. And that's where I would find it in the 10+1.
So if we assume it is in 10+1, then number one, there's going to be a a pathway for students certainly to have input, because it still has a significant effect on students. And then it enters into the mutual agreement. So there is an obligation by the decision maker to initiate a conversation with the academic senate in a reasonable time frame, and this again gets into the reasonableness. And if any of these issues ever end up in court, that's what a judge is going to look at. Did the parties act reasonably? And so a reasonable time frame, might be a month in between board meetings. As long as the academic senate, not a month in July or August, but a month during the academic year, an attempt to reach mutual agreement. And then, I think, if we're going to go against the interests of the academic senate, then we have to document those compelling legal, fiscal, or organizational reasons. Now, frankly, on all of these, I think or most of these issues, there could be a case can be made that in the last 5 years there was a compelling legal, fiscal, or organizational reason. So the question is the process by which the decision was made and whether there was that reasonable opportunity to seek mutual agreement.
I would agree that the goal is to find ways to increase student opportunities to take classes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's looking for better ways to provide opportunities for students to learn. Package it this way. Some are accelerating classes, some are modularizing, stretching out, some are grouping, 8-week courses. Some people are just now adding back winter sessions and summer sessions. Wonderful opportunities for students, no doubt. But all of that affects curriculum. All of that affects delivery and opportunity for students to be able to actually be successful in those courses. What support services are available? Are the tutoring centers open during those times? Is the library open during those times? So when you change something that has such global effect, and you know it will, and because that's the intent, is to help more students, then think about it globally. If that's going to be the case, then engage those folks. So the Senate should have been involved and had an opportunity to comment on the possible effects that this would have on all kinds of aspects of learning. And that's where you really want to be able to bring those folks in, use their expertise. Get the librarians, get the counselors, get those tutoring center and learning center people in to talk about how you can do this in a reduced or changed or modified format so that the students have the best options. And that's where student input and certainly classified staff, if you're going to have no opportunity now to upgrade your technology. This is a big thing in my campus. When we start having classes all year round, there's no downtime for technology upgrades and the lab overturns, or all of that kind of stuff. So it has a big impact on staff too. So keeping all of that stuff in mind, think more holistically about the campus. And now all of you that are here today have heard that. That means you have to champion the opportunity for other groups to be involved. So faculty, you're going to have to champion the right for classified to be involved, because you've heard that they have a right to be and have that reasonable participation that affects them. Students, if you hear about stuff, you got to say, hey, did you talk to the Senate about that? Because doggone, that sounds like something in the 10+1. So you guys have to help each other. You're hearing now about how we have roles and responsibilities. Maybe we didn't quite get it before, thought it was hands off or all hands on, and now you got to find a way to help each other.
Well, and oftentimes we talk about that issue. If it's a 10+1 issue, I like to say the academic senate should drive the bus. Because the goal should be getting everybody in alignment with a decision. Administrators, faculty, staff, students, and as Beth mentioned earlier, deliver that to the board. And there's nothing the board likes more than for everybody, including the business folks that decide to sign off on the balanced budget, for everybody to come in and say we're in agreement. That's what boards like. Boards don't like division. Now, one issue we have to ask is on this, was a reasonable consideration, and the documentation we've been given, and we've been given a lot more on these various issues, everything was constant talk about over the objections of over the objections of, which if I'm a judge reviewing this case, I say, well, clearly there was a reasonable opportunity because there was time to develop objections. And so then you have to, was there good faith, those sorts of issues, and then compelling legal, fiscal, organizational reasons if it was a 10+1 issue.
I was wondering if you could recommend strategies for working through different interpretations of what falls within the scope of 10+1, because I think that's something that we struggle with. One example is in the block scheduling. I was recently at the statewide chief instructional officers meeting where they highlighted block scheduling from their perspective was absolutely not a 10+1 item and was an operational issue that chief instructional officers should seek the input of faculty informally, which did not have to come from the academic senate. So how do we?
There's two pieces there. We're to separate it. Because the academic senate is the voice for faculty on significant effect issues. And absolutely block scheduling would have significant gray area on exactly how expansive is educational program development and policies and standards related to student success.
And I'll follow up on the chief instructional officers, or that's mainly your VPs of instruction or academic affairs, and they do have the right to schedule. That I totally get. They're enrollment management experts. They need to look at that. But if you're changing the way the curriculum is delivered, then that should go to the Senate to help them understand what that's going to mean for redesign of courses or repackaging of programs. So it is a big deal for the Senate to be involved because it's about delivery of the curriculum. Now, if it's just saying we're going to schedule classes at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and all the way into the evening, or we want to make sure there's Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday options, faculty are going to be good with that too because they want to serve students. But if you're talking about compressing time or extending time in terms of how the content is delivered, that affects the curriculum and its programs. And if you want to have a plan of how to do this, you can always ask the Senate. You don't have to say, well, I'm going to make a call here that it's not a Senate thing. And then the Senate goes, what? You didn't ask us? Why not ask? And let the Senate, have that conversation. They may have their exec team look at it and say, we're going to try to get some feedback for you, but we're going to, let this be handled this way, or we're going to let curriculum do it, or, there's different ways to approach it too. And I hope that, again, that's goodwill. And I know there's some expeditious reasons, right? Gosh, we want to get this done. We want to have a new schedule for next fall. Let's try to, gear up here. But you want to make sure that you get people buying in. So let's find out how we can ask.
Well, and, people say, does this goodwill crap you keep throwing out there? But it does work. There are a lot of college campuses where they make very difficult decisions and they don't have an overly cumbersome process. They have a well-functioning college council and relationships, including some of the largest districts in the state have moved through very difficult processes, with a lot of it being done informally, where the academic senate takes a pass because you have a strong academic senate president. This is one of the problems in City College San Francisco. They had such a bad committee structure that there was no power to the academic senate president. So that president couldn't take a pass on issues. Everything had to be sent down to a specialized committee, which is a disaster. So creating a culture where some difficult issues can be made, but be made by the affected unions, the president, the academic senate president, the students, kind of less formally, and not sending everything down through that framework I talked about. I want to come over here. Is this directly on block scheduling?
I just wanted to clarify our block scheduling, when we did the block scheduling here at Pasadena, it wasn't really centered around anything other than trying to create some kind of regular start time for classes. In no way did it change hours that were met, days of the week that were met. It changed maybe someone starting at 8 o'clock instead of 8:20 or something like that. It was really trying to do that. So it didn't really affect hours of instruction, modes of delivery, or anything like that. It was centered around creating a unified start time. Because we didn't have one. We had some classes that would be 3 days a week, start at 8 a.m., 8:10, 8:20, or whatever. So that's really what it was about, to make better use of that.
I have a question also on block scheduling. It's my, well, I just been on 2 accreditation teams, so had the training 9 times, all right? And one of the changes that now it says you must check and make sure every single class it's the Carnegie hour, unless there is a pivotal reason or not. Now, it would appear to me that that would be something that the district want to look at, each one will look at very, very carefully. And if, for example, the faculty feel that it's better to have 35-minute classes or 40-minute classes over a longer time period, that doesn't mean the Carnegie hour. And this is a class that's taught everywhere in the United States within the Carnegie hour. Could you respond to that? It seems to me like that's a compelling, but the college has a compelling district in meeting the accreditation standards, particularly that one, which has now been pulled out and said you must check every single class on this.
Well, that's up to your curriculum committee to determine. If the faculty are going to propose the appropriate numbers of hours of instruction for that class, right? So they're going to say it's a 3-unit course. That's typically about 48 to 54 hours of instruction, depending on what your semester runs in terms of days and weeks. So if that's the way the course is structured to deliver the content, 48 to 54 hours of instruction, then you have to figure out how to do that in a week, or whatever your time frame is, in order to get that content delivered appropriately. Now, what you also want to do on the enrollment side is make sure you're meeting your student accounting principles so that you're not losing any FTES, because you're going to meet the Carnegie hour through your curriculum committee, but you don't want to lose FTES by the way the class is offered in the number of minutes per day. So there are two sides working together on this, as opposed to opposite.
You don't want to go beyond the accounting principles on generating additional FTES, which was one of the reasons some districts had gotten a little too creative and had to pay money back to the chancellor's office.
Can I just make a follow-up comment on that? I was on the team that he did the first one, college through college. Which, by the way, was excellent. We were very impressed. And every single class.
Other commissions did the same thing.
Yes.
That every single class that we looked at, all texts were structured on the Carnegie hour. So, and it seemed to me like this was the model. And I just am concerned that as we go through this process, that we don't get the accreditation trouble, because this is the first time that I have ever seen it. You must check to see if we're meeting the Carnegie hour. And so I just think that's something we need to do.
So one last hand on this issue, and then we've got to come to the microphone.
Thank you.
We'll come back to this issue.
I have a question with regard to goodwill, because you've been bringing this up over and over, and sometimes it's difficult to define what goodwill actually means. So, for the instance I'd like to give to, at each board meeting, we have roughly 30 minutes for all faculty and students to get up and speak to our board members, and that's with regard to the Brown Act, it's 30 minutes max, and no response. Would you consider that an act of goodwill?
I'll say yes. What I'll say is that that's pretty common around the state to have set a specific amount of time for public comment. In fact, within that, the speakers are probably restricted to the amount of time they get to speak as well, which is pretty common. The fact that the board doesn't respond to any of the public comments is also pretty standard. And I facilitate a board, and that's the way we run our public comment, exactly the same way. We give 30 minutes for items not on the agenda, limit the number of minutes each speaker can speak, and we do not engage those speakers when they speak to us. It's a time for individuals to address the board, not to debate or engage with the board. So if the board wanted to have that kind of two-way conversation on items, you would have to have a different kind of a structure other than a traditional board meeting, would be my understanding. But again, the goodwill is sometimes jeopardized by structures. like the Brown Act and what it allows us to do in that kind of a time frame. How you bring your goodwill and intentional good faith effort to the table to solve problems can be handled in lots of other places other than at that formal time of a board meeting. But I'll let Scott also.
Well, and that is not meant to be the point for every reasonable consideration. The reason we have multiple readings for agenda items is to allow for a period of formal communication. Board meetings should not be about formal communication to the board. That should happen generally in writing and be done in advance of the board meeting, and ideally it gets incorporated into a board packet or something. So public comment is something we like to express our frustration to public bodies, and I've done it myself, but it's not meant to be the formal consultative process that we've talked about today. But it is about, the overall sense of goodwill. If you're constantly having board meetings where there's a great deal of frustration, that's something that you need to work on as a college, and it's not something that we can fix. Colleges sometimes have to bring in therapists or communications professionals that can talk through with major constituencies how to foster better culture. Sorry about that.
It's okay, no, it's good. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Stephanie Bowman, I'm a faculty member. And I guess my question is more about the overall effectiveness of our shared governance model here on our campus. There's been a lot of focus so far today on the rights and the responsibilities of each one of the constituency groups. And we have a lot of conversation about that here on our campus. But unfortunately, it's also made us very territorial. And so a lot of what we're doing on our campus is focusing on a fight over who gets to do what. So, for example, I sit on the Academic Senate, and a lot of our focus in our agendas is about that territorial aspect of 10+1, rather than a discussion about how 10+1 items can serve students effectively, how we can promote learning, how we can foster student success. And so my question is about how do we get to a point where we can collaborate? So to give you a little bit of context behind that, because of the tension specifically between, say, the faculty and the administration, anyone who collaborates across those boundaries faces a lot of scrutiny on our campus. So for example, there's actually a proposal going through our Senate Bylaws Committee right now that would redefine regular faculty, and faculty who receive reassigned time for collaborating on projects like assessment, accreditation, professional development, or those faculty who represent our honors program or our veterans would essentially no longer be considered regular faculty and would have their voting rights and their ability to serve on shared governance stripped from them. And so as someone who's facing that consequence, because I work with accreditation, I don't see the goodwill in that. And so I'm wondering, how do we get to a place where we're using shared governance to collaborate and to serve our students effectively, rather than this fighting and this tribalism that we seem to be facing right now?
You're at a point of reset. You've been through some tough times, all colleges. And I've been down here before, done one of these before. It's not the current administration. There have been tensions for many years. And the good thing is we are at a point of reset. The budget news is good going forward. And, very few issues, in my mind, are 10+1 novel issues that you go through the flow chart. These decisions should largely already be made through your planning processes. So how do you have effective planning processes with buy-ins of the affected constituencies and an agreement that when we have to make good or bad decisions, that maybe 10+1 or just a significant effect, we already have an agreement on our values and our processes that we refer to when we make decisions. And so you pull a lot of that busy work out of the meetings of the academic senate, of the formal processes, and did it go to that committee or that committee? That's what I've seen in best practices. People they know what our values are, they know what our direction are, we bought in, we may have won some and lost some, but we know we're going to add 5 full-time faculty, we already know where we're going to do it. Well in advance of that decision. The student equity plan I referenced. Some colleges are going to wait until the budget is signed and therefore September 15th or whatever to start that process. Well, you're supposed to be doing the student equity plans every year anyway. You know, so that's kind of what I would offer. And I think the cultures in which it's just kind of, everything is all part of the same planning process, and that's where we go to for the incremental decisions. Those are the best practice colleges I've seen.
I'm really sad to hear that faculty are being targeted for participating in governance, because that's what this is all about. If the Senate is charged by the board to reach mutual agreement with them on all of these 10 post-1 areas to help move the college forward and meet its accreditation obligations and do what's right for students, then faculty have to engage. You have to. So if faculty are engaging in that process because that's what we've agreed to do, and now they're being challenged because they're participating in that process, faculty through the Senate need to stop and figure out what they value. If you value your role in participatory governance and you're going to take on your responsibility as the active participant for your faculty organization as a whole, then you have to be supported by your Senate for that work. You are their representative. You are their agent. You are the liaison to bringing that information back to the Senate so that the Senate can be engaged in a participatory governance process. If faculty are being chastised for that, or they're now going to be considered less than other faculty because they've engaged in participatory governance, then you guys have a long way to go to furthering to develop really the roles that we have here. And we're going to need to think about some educational opportunities perhaps for some ideas or values of the Senate. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn and maybe don't know the whole situation as well as I could, but I'm here to encourage all of you, and especially the Senate, to look at faculty roles and support each other in those. Find a way to figure out how the faculty can participate effectively so that the decisions are the best ones that can be made. So I hope I'm not out of line. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I guess what you're talking about is like what I think a lot of us here do is participate in the self-government or governance, but we don't get paid anything extra. What's happening is that a lot of people, because of accreditation, have been given sort of administrative duties and to behave in an administrative manner, and they're getting paid for that separately. So to us, that's a different animal, because a lot of times these people are the same people who then get promoted on to permanent administrative positions. And so we end up feeling like when they were acting on our behalf as faculty members, that they already were in their hearts and primarily more of an administrator. And so because a lot of this, and this is a result, and I'm not on that committee, and I don't really know the details, but I am on academic senate, and I know that there's a lot of sort of trust about there being a bright line between what does come from the academic senate and what does come from this administration, so then we can come to a mutual agreement rather than having this sort of pretend like that's the voice of the academic senate when the academic senators or the faculty are feeling that maybe they're not. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but I'm saying that there's just this level of mistrust in that area, and that without addressing that, that, we're not going to be able to move forward.
Okay, let me address two parts to that. Number one, it wasn't in our slides, but it's really important to note that the Senate has to appoint all faculty members who are serving on academic and professional matters, committees, task forces, whatever. That is the Senate's job.
Not done yet.
Very critical piece of information for the Senate to talk about. All appointments of faculty members to shared governance, participatory governance work must go through the Senate. The only caveat is faculty appointments where there are collective bargaining issues need to come from the union. So on some issues, you need both Senate and union reps there. So then each house gets to do their appointments. But if it's academic and professional, then the Senate needs to step up and make those appointments so that those folks are accountable back to the Senate.
But that's for committee work, not like what's being talked about as release time.
So that's my second point. So second thing, on reassign time. I strongly encourage you to find a process, if you don't already have one, that reviews the scope of the work that's being outlined to determine first if it's faculty work. And if it's faculty work, then figure out how to come up with the right way to recommend someone to do that faculty work and get reassigned time for it. So we had to do that at my campus because some faculty members either wanted to do work that was like administrative type stuff, they were done in the classroom, wanted to find a way out, so they were creating work for themselves. They were recommending themselves for the work, and there was no oversight, not by the Senate or our union, and the administration was like throwing their hands up. Gosh, we got these faculty who want out of the classroom, we're happy to give them the work, but dang it, we don't want the union coming down our back about this. So we came up with a process that first said define the work and explain why it's faculty work and how much reassigned time it takes. Get both the Senate and the union to sign off on it before you even talk about a person. Nobody's applying for this work until both sides agree and recommend to the administration together that it's faculty work that needs to be done, and here's how much reassigned time it takes, whether that's your SLO coordinator, your professional development coordinator, that's some new grant thingamajig that comes down the line. If you're talking about getting reassigned time, and you needed to design this position, this work, and maybe it's squishy between faculty and administrative stuff, define that. Because if it starts to leak over into administrative work, your Senate and union reps ought to be able to clarify that ahead of time and tell the administration, this is not faculty work. You need to assign somebody else to do this. This is not our job. So that's what I would encourage you to do, and then your appointments need to come through the appropriate bodies to get that done.
Thank you for saying that, because as someone actually on the bylaws committee that Stephanie just referred to, that is therein lies the problem, and we are just trying to address that because that hadn't been done here. As you suggested, we're trying to go for full faculty representation in colleges there. So thank you for mentioning that, and I don't think we're being chastised here at the school for participating in shared governance. That's not the case at all. Okay, but yeah, my question is back to what is considered reasonable, and when you mention reasonable, are you just referring to the time frame, and then also compelling? Because regardless of whether the elimination of winter in the calendar is a collective bargaining issue, it sounds like it also is very much a shared governance issue, and that has been overstepped here. As Dan Haley has said, there was no mutual agreement to begin with, and then there are the compelling legal, financial, or organizational reasons. That's my question also. Who determines if it's compelling? And perhaps you mentioned also writing to the chancellor's office and then court. So it sounds like it's both collective bargaining and shared governance. So we have what's compelling, what's reasonable.
Let's use an example of plus-minus rating. significant effect on students and faculty. Subject to 10+1 and in consultation with students, give every reasonable consideration. So first we're going to go through 10+1. Faculty say this is a great idea. Students say this is going to affect transfer GPAs and we're opposed. In my mind, so we have to mutually agree with the Senate. Although, if the students are loudly objecting, that could be perhaps a compelling organizational reason why not, if it's found that, well, this is going to affect transfer and it's going to hurt our students. So how is the decision made? So this decision is going to go to the board, and ideally, in the world I recommend, that process is outlined in the board agenda item. And the positions of the different organizations is put into the board item. And is orally presented by the administrator, or let's say it's the Senate providing it. The Senate says, we really believe this is the best practice. The state Senate says, do it. I'm not suggesting that. But, and this is why we're coming forward with this. Unfortunately, the students are opposed for these reasons. So having a process where you can document that the positions were presented is the reasonable consideration. Now, reasonable also has, is a time issue. So doing the decision in the month of July, when the students are gone largely, would not be reasonable, nor would it. So you have both, it could be 3 months might be unreasonable sometimes in the year. At other times of the year, that's way, far more time than we need. Board meetings, many decisions can be made in the 2 weeks between board meetings on issues that have, that are a significant effect on faculty, staff, and students in part 10+1 issues.
Yeah, and I'll just stick with the plus and minus grading, because we did that at my campus. And so let me talk about how we made sure it was reasonable, and then we can talk about compelling. So some faculty at our campus, actually part-time faculty, brought a proposal to the Senate to go to plus and minus grading. They were really jazzed about it, thought it was really a good option. They were tired of giving the same grade, letter B grade, to students who barely got over 80% and students who were at 89%. They really wanted to do plus and minus grading. And as soon as the students got, the Student Association saw it on our agenda, then they were really interested. What's the Senate talking about? Plus and minus grading. We better go and find out what's happening there. And our Senate did reach out to the students ahead of time to say, student organization, this is something we want to hear from you guys. We did all the calculations, the transfer center did all the calculations of the GPA before and after, and so we talked it through, and we got recommendations from other campuses in the state who had done this already and how did it turn out, and what did they like about it, and what was bad, and the students were really struggling with it. They could see the data, and the biggest concern for them were students who got 4.0s under the old system would not have 4.0s under the new system. And that was a real big problem for the students. Faculty were not so worried about that. They really wanted those students who earned a 4.0 to really earn a 4.0 and not have it be this big range anymore. And so that was the sticking point right there. That was the only sticking point for us. The students who had 4.0s were worried about losing them, and the faculty who were awarding all the grades felt that this was a better distribution of actual student achievement, going to plus and minus. So it took about 2 years to work it through. Finally did. Both campuses agreed. The students actually were concerned, and that was what was expressed to the Senate, it was expressed to the administration, it was expressed to the board, that that's what they were worried about. In the end, the compromise that was made so that there was more flexibility was that teachers could decide whether they wanted to use the plus or minus grading system. So that meant that some faculty could still use A, B, C, D, F, and others would implement plus and minus grading. And it just had to be in the syllabus so that the student knew ahead of time how they would be graded, whether that teacher was going to use plus and minus grading. So what we felt we did was try to give the most opportunity for students to understand that if they were a 4.0 and they did want to take a teacher with plus or minus grading, they could opt out. That was their choice. If they were willing to sign up for that teacher with plus and minus grading, then they had to earn the highest grade in the class in order to keep that 4.0. Now, in terms of compelling arguments to the board, I think the board was very happy to see that sort of compromise and the amount of time we took to work through the issue, rather than just say, proposal came to the Senate on the beginning of the month, and by 2 months later, we made the decision and we were going to implement, and it's done. But we took the time to allow for lots of engagement. Now, that may not work in every place, may not work with every Senate and student organization and board, but we felt that that was a better approach to help the board understand that all of the opportunity for comment from individuals who might be affected by this had an opportunity to be heard, and we had an opportunity to review the data.
Now, if the data suggested that there was going to be a drop in transfers, and that Academy Senate brought this forward, and the board wanted to go the other way, that might be a compelling organizational reason. You say that, we're in an era of, measuring metrics and all of those things. Here is why we can't accept your recommendation. Okay, so that's what you're looking for, is when you have a compelling and not accepted decision.
Well, who would decide what the board has decided to do was compelling? Is that a court?
That would be a subject matter that, the state chancellor's office is the official body that would receive a complaint and may or may not be able to respond to the complaint because of staffing issues. And so therefore, it could go to court. Now, there's really only been the one significant case, a couple of minor other issues that have gone on over years.
Yes, I'm glad you touched on plus minus grading and student interaction there, because Stephanie mentioned with the tribalism, I was AS president last year, so I got intimately involved in state governance, so if it's changed now, forgive me. But one of the things that I would notice is that someone was a 10+1, it seemed to be exclusively the realm of academic senate. Or, and if it wasn't a 10+1, then it didn't need any consultation at all. And so how do we, what is the best practice for creating a system that really ensures that there is that cross collaboration, that the academic senate is bringing in the students, the administration is bringing in the students, and the staff, keeping them all together so that, it's not automatically 10+1, therefore everyone else go away, this is our thing, or it's operational, go away. And then the second part of that would be, are there any systems in the state where there's a process by which there is conflict on this? It can go somewhere before it gets to the chancellor's office in courts, like an arbitration or third-party system that exists.
We've actually been called in, as, to provide written reports and determinations, who was right, who was wrong. Usually everybody walks away feeling like they lost something, and that happens. So, that's an informal process, but a couple of colleges over the years have invited and said, we'll accept whatever decision is made. Now, again, in most cases, including if we go to court, all we do is we go back and start the process over again. In some cases, it would be, no, the decision maker did not have a compelling reason not to accept the mutual agreement with the academic senate, or not to require the mutual agreement of the academic senate. And if there's no compelling reason, then there would be no out. But in a lot of cases, if a compelling legal, fiscal, or organizational reason can be found, and I'll be candid, I think most judges are going to defer to the administrations on campuses because of expertise judges don't want to get into a value discussion of what's compelling for legal, fiscal, or organizational reasons. I think it would have to be a pretty extreme case for them to not find a compelling legal, fiscal, or organizational reason, or more likely, there just was no documentation provided, in the decision-making process to show that a compelling reason was considered. In some cases, we've advised, in cases where there just was no trust, and worse than what I sense in the room here, we've advised, okay, every agenda item, in a board package should have, academic senate, a date or a position, classified students. And, I think it's better in a more narrative sense as part of analysis of an agenda item. But, in some cases, that's where you have to go to provide that documentation that, yes, something did go through a process. Now, a best practice campus, where we want you to be, a lot of these things are done informally. And because we've planned out ahead, we know what we're going to be working on. State chancellor a chancellor within the system that we all know very well, the state chancellor, I can't give it away, a lot of these things at his district were done over breakfast. Because that level of trust had been built up. And so you didn't need to have, the exhaustive processes. Now, it requires not only the trust between the leaders of the institution, but also the leaders within each organization. So the academic senate president has to have the trust of his or her membership to make those kind of informal decisions. But again, if you've gone through a lot of these things in advance, you know what the position of the constituency is.
Yeah, I would add that it's always better to try to preempt it than have to fix it later. So if there's a way to look at the scope of what's happening in the state, gosh, there's a ton of stuff happening. Geez, once upon a time you could put things on a back burner and they just kind of stay there, but now everything's on the front burner boiling over. So you have to have some way to address all that stuff. How are you going to do that? And who should take the lead on it? Are they all academic and professional, or do some of these need to just go to different kinds of groups? Somebody's got to help do that assessment. Somebody's got to bring all those issues to the table and say, who's going to do this? Is that a leadership team? Is that a breakfast conversation? Is that a monthly, weekly meeting where that kind of stuff occurs, where you talk about it and you say, well, gee, if we're going to really look at plus and minus grading, we better give a heads up to the students, that it's coming down the pipe, so they have an opportunity to, get that on their calendar. So you guys in the room are all the superheroes of this now, because you just heard all of this, that you have to watch out for each other. You have to know that we got to come up with a plan for delegating and making sure that if it's a 10+1, the faculty are engaged. Because sometimes the faculty don't hear about it, or they're busy doing something else, and we got sidetracked with the latest other thing that came down the way. So who's going to help us out? And same for the students. You guys all heard what the students have comment on. What's in there, all those 9+1+1 areas. So we need to give them a heads up. You can't just say, oh, hurry, let's go. They have president's coming. It's going the other way. Not tell them that we're doing this. We got to find a way to have that goodwill to say, let's get the students involved, or let's get classified. They need to know about this. And then that's how you build goodwill. That's not even trust yet. All that is saying it's on the agenda, or it's on our agenda, and you need to know about it. And it's not saying, well, you should have read our agenda. It's saying, no, I'm telling you it's on our agenda. I'm being intentional about that. Now, I don't know what you're going to do with that information. You may oppose me, and that's where I get worried about trust. But the first step is to make sure that people who are significantly affected by these issues get to participate. And you all have to do that for each other.
And don't go back and say that I said that Bryce made all of his decisions over breakfast. I mean, still had a district council, every item did go on a formal agenda, but the work was done in advance. And so it's not that you start off with that very first time it's on the agenda, you kind of know the parameters, and then you have every constituency weigh in.
Thank you very much. Eduardo Cairo, President Academic Senate. May I first begin with a clarification here. I've attended several of the bylaws committee, and what they're trying to do is not chastise any faculty, but simply trying to ensure that the faculty that are on reassigned time are working in the best interest of the faculty. The past practice of this campus administration give reassigned time to faculty.
I hope they're working in the best interest of the students.
I apologize.
And I hope those are alive.
Well, the perception is that given the fact that the reassigned time was given by administration, there is no accountability for the faculty themselves. So what the current bylaws are trying to do is have all faculty that want to participate in this type of activity simply be given that reassigned time by the Senate. If the Senate gives them that reassigned time, then they are accountable to the Senate. And if the Senate believes that they are not working in the best interest of students and faculty, then the Senate can remove them. At the moment, that process is not in place. So what the bylaws committee is trying to do is to ensure that they are working in the best interest of the students and the faculty. And again, no one is being chastised.
The only concern,
That was the word that I used, so I totally apologize to everyone. So my apologies, Eduardo. I did not intend to say that you guys were doing that. That was what I understood, what I heard, so my apologies.
but my concerns with that is you're trying to extend 10+1. Because you're going beyond process, some of the process-related issues, some of the more general issues related to student success, where the policy development should be happening in Senate. So the policy development happens there, but if it's a feeling like you have the ability to do the assignment, then you're in control of day-to-day decisions. And I mean, I get politically why you might want to do that, but that's not what the law is designed for.
No, I understand. The bylaws committee understand it. It's just they're trying to ensure that those that are on the assigned time are working in the best interest of those that should be.
So that should be done at the policy level, not at the practice level.
Right. The other issues regarding, I'll go back to what Dan mentioned regarding block scheduling. The committee, we have a shared governance committee on block scheduling. The last time it met was February 2013. About 2 months ago, roughly 2 months ago, during our division meeting, we were informed of this new block schedule. It never went through shared governance at all. It simply did not go through that process. And so it's not that the faculty are opposed to the changes, but the process by which it was implemented. The moment that one of the administrators came to speak to this issue at the Senate, right away several faculty members had concerns about how it's going to affect their departments. Had the process gone through shared governance, these problems should have been implemented. But instead the response is, well, we're going to implement it, and as the problems develop, we'll try to fix it as we go. And it's just the wrong way. So what happened? So my question here is, mutual agreement did not occur. So going back to Dan Haley's question is, what do we need to do when there is no mutual agreement? Because we should remain in place, but that doesn't happen. So when it doesn't happen, what should we do? So
my recommendation is that the Senate write a letter to the decision maker, whether it was the CIO or president, and identify which of the 10+1 you believe it fell under, and ask for a response as to why mutual agreement wasn't sought. Because that is one, frankly, where we got into this a little bit earlier about, depending on exactly what was happening, it may or may not have fallen under 10+1. And it is your obligation to police it, if you will. When you believe that there was a violation, your first responsibility is to seek an explanation as to why your perceived violation occurred. And that's the paper trail that kind of has to go. You don't start by saying, we're going to shut things down because we believe a decision was made wrongly. Because there are a lot of gray areas. 10+1 seems easy. We could come up with 1,000 gray areas. And that just having that discussion back and forth and not bringing it to the boardroom at public comment where you can't have it back and forth is, what we recommend.
Yeah, I think that's a good step, is to get something in writing that would explain it. But, it would be great if someone who had a cool idea, like let's fix block scheduling, for whatever the motivation. We're losing FTES. It's not a good method the way we're doing it now. We need to have a better consistent schedule for students so that they can take classes in an easier way. We think that this is going to serve our community better because of the bus schedule. I don't know. Whatever the reasons are, somebody should bring those to the folks that are affected by that first, and let the input come back to them. Anytime you are leading and you want your decisions to be implemented with the least amount of resistance, then you want the greatest amount of buy-in ahead of time. And those reasons that you want the buy-in can be very compelling. Like, if faculty want to do what's right for students, we want to see that. If students are being negatively affected by things that we've done where we maybe haven't thought about it, or could do a better job if we just had, it's my department, I didn't realize that all the other departments were on a different schedule. Gosh, wouldn't that make sense for students if we align some of this stuff? It's an awareness too. And so, if it doesn't happen that way, then you just have so much undoing and redoing of stuff that causes so much more angst for everyone. So if there's a way to look at those issues ahead of time, hopefully, and say, I wonder if this is going to affect faculty. And I bet 9 times out of 10, it's going to. Even if you can't find it on the 10+1, it's going to affect faculty somehow. And my next guess is going to affect students about that many times too. Just call. We have these cell phones. We think we're connected all the time, but we don't use them maybe enough sometimes in that reaching out to let folks know that there's an issue here, there's something coming down. I just got it across my desk. Hey, did you see that email? It just came from the Chancellor's Office or the State Academic Senate about AB 86 or the next thing that's coming. And sharing that information ahead of time. Can it be informal? Yes. Can it be formal? Yes. The goal is to make it happen somehow so that by the time you get to a good decision, the board can feel confident in it. And so can everybody else on campus. Because there's so many decisions that have to be made, and I can understand an urgency by some folks to want to this is really my territory, I'm like in charge of this area, I'm just going to go ahead and get this done because it's in my job description, it's probably in my evaluation, and I want to get it done. But, we are collaborative, collegial organizations. It's academia, gosh. That's what we're about, is talking stuff through, talking it to death sometimes, but talking it through, and so we've got to find a way to do that. Now, the unfortunate piece is what happens when it doesn't. Because when it doesn't happen the way people are expecting it or hoping it works, you just crumble that whole foundation underneath there. And to put those bricks back in when it's already started to crumble from the top is very difficult to do, as you guys know. But there has to be a starting place. There has to be a commitment that if this topic comes across my desk and I'm a leader at this campus, and there's a lot of leaders in a lot of different places, from curriculum chairs to student government leaders to classified senate to union reps and senate reps and administrators in all capacities, that if I see something come across my desk that I think might affect those other groups, I gotta give them a shout out. I just gotta. And then you open the opportunity to build trust again. You open the opportunity for dialogue. And we may not be able to do a lot about some of the issues that have transpired in the past, that are in the past, and things got muffed up one way or another, perhaps, from your perspective. But we have an opportunity to go forward you have an opportunity starting, today, tomorrow, whatever the next thing is, to try to find a way to make it better. So you know what doesn't work. Got some examples of that, for sure. But what are some examples of things that can work? What can we do? What are we willing to commit to? What are we willing to do as a baby step? Just one, because it's overwhelming when the bricks are crumbling and things are starting to get shaky at the top. You can't put all of them back under there right away, but you can start in one corner of the foundation and figure out what we're willing to do.
I put this slide back up a while back, but I think right now is the perfect time to point out another phrase I didn't mention earlier, that's turf bias. My sense is pretty much everybody in this room is ready to say, no, that's mine right now. Everybody. It's my sense. And it's got to be about ours, our students, our community. And we got to put away that stuff from the past. Goodwill will come about once we start having an active dialogue together, not apart. And that's why I don't like to, I like the processes where you have a college council and there are big issues and little issues, but there are no surprises. I had breakfast with Bryce last Wednesday, Vice Chancellor Harris, simply so there'd be no surprises. I've got a board meeting coming up. We've got consultation council on Thursday. There's some real tough issues. We're trying to wrestle with the faculty obligation number and all that stuff. We just sat down to have breakfast. Everybody's got time to do a 7:30 breakfast once a week. Sit down, go through the issues so there'd be no surprises. Okay? Because we have a state-local tension. My job is to look out for your interests. His job is to look out for the state's interests. Hopefully they're aligned. Not always. And that's when I mentioned him having breakfast meetings when he was Chancellor of Los Rios.
He meets with me
And he meets with Beth too. It's exactly for that reason. Now sometimes it's just a pick up a phone call of, I just want to let you know, I know your members may have a problem with this, I want to see how far we can go. Before we ever get to the policy formation process, before we're sitting around the consultation council table, where people are amped up, we've already I've had a chance to talk to some of my leadership, Beth's had a chance to talk to some of her leadership. We kind of have a good idea. This takes work, and it's about relationships far more than policy. It takes people. If this is all done by computer, it would be a lot easier, but it takes people and it takes relationships.
Thank you very much. Your responses at least has validated the actions of the Senate. We have created resolutions. We present to the College Council, and at the next College Council meeting, they will place under action items, so we can take action items, the action item, vote on it, and then pass it to the Board of Trustees. And what you stated right now regarding goodwill, absolutely, we definitely need to build relationships. Unfortunately, there's a lack of, and the mere fact that the Academic Senate was not allowed to invite members of shared governance committees for our own lunch. That's how petty it's gone. But hopefully this is the first step that we can move forward and begin to create the goodwill. Thank you.
I've heard lots of elements from different constituencies of screwing up. And you can probably all think of points of screw-ups in the last 5 years by a variety of constituencies. You could, every single day, you have the opportunity to get up and say, you know what, I screwed that up and I'm going to do it differently next time. I do it with my own staff in our office. I do it with policy, with consultation council, and you can do it too. And that's how you get past the turf boundaries. If you're not willing to admit that we all have ownership and that tensions ran high, then you're not going to move forward. You're not going to build goodwill. You're going to stay in a dysfunctional state, and it's going to hurt the students. I don't think that the accrediting commission is going to come in and yank accreditation because of this. But if you have to start going through a process of sanctions from the accrediting commission, just going to first level sanction, which this is a subject matter they're willing to go to, has cost some colleges enrollment. And while we say we're all about students, what happens when enrollment goes down? Jobs go down. So we all have a vested interest.
No, thank you so much. What a great time to come here right before tax day, right? So my name is Casey Pennell. I'm a faculty in our speech department, and I was on the executive board for Academic Senate last year. And I really appreciate some of the things that you're talking about. I know this is a fun meeting because you're coming in with people who are like, here we go. But when we're talking about goodwill, I think one of the things we've really struggled with is trust, which you started to bridge to. And the thing that I've been really interested in is how we look at the 10+1 in terms of managing change and what that looks like. And so, for example, I'm going to go in two ways. One is, let's say something comes up under the 10+1, and we start to have a dialogue about it. How do we have a dialogue that really looks collegial? And if that dialogue comes out maybe not in the position that you wanted, so a decision is made even through the shared governance process that you didn't feel really awesome about, how do we make sure that we are talking about it in a way that doesn't individualize people, point people out, like it's really about ideas? But the second thing is, how might we use the 10+1 to be proactive in terms of the college planning process as opposed to reactive? Because my experience is, the reason it gets so personal is that we're constantly reacting to things as opposed to being proactive around them. And so I'll use a basic model that we have on campus as an example. About 3 years ago, it's funny that you guys mentioned the idea of moving from a chair model to a dean model. Scott mentioned that earlier. We're in kind of a reverse process where we're going from a dean model to something else. It's been about a 3.5-year process. There are a number of people in this room who chaired committees to try to make this a collegiate dialogue and move forward, and into our academic senate to move through this model, and it got shot down, and now we're in a place of ambiguity, right? We're not sure what's going to happen, faculty get really very unsafe, and now it feels like we're reacting. And even though the process started about 3.5 years ago, I still hear in meetings like this was just sprung on us, right? Like this just came out. So the reason that I'm asking that is there a way that we might, and particularly our Senate leaders, might use the 10+1 as a way to negotiate that change a little bit smoother, but also be proactive in terms of what future impacts that will have?
Yeah, my experience is that faculty always feel like stuff just got sprung on. You know, it's...
We all do.
Yeah, like, where did this come from? I didn't know we were doing this and changing this. Where did this come from? And, it's been on the agenda for a year. Where have you been? You know, so I feel the challenge of that, trying to make sure they can get the word out. And I feel the pain for Senate leaders who feel like, gosh, I put this on the agenda every time, and every time we read it, people are going, well, they're still stuck at the first part, right? Nobody can get past the first part of it. So the idea of being proactive is important. So recognizing that some of the things that are happening at the campus are about 10+1. And so the Senate, and use your faculty leaders in other areas to help feed you that information, like curriculum, what are they hearing from the curriculum side? Professional development leader, what are you hearing? Because that might change this year. There's legislation, stuff going on. You're hearing your accreditation folks. Get those folks to give you some of those topics so that you can get them on the agenda. And once they're there, how do you start to build decision making? Or once you make a decision, how do you get the faculty to support it? Because sometimes once a decision's made, people still like to not back it, right? They want to keep their sides. Like, well, the Senate made that decision, but I'm not doing that. And so that doesn't help either, because that erodes the fabric of the Senate. Because the Senate has to be able to make decisions. That's the recommending body. They're the ones that are going to take the recommendations forward. So an individual faculty member may not like the decision that was made with the Senate, or they may really like it. Either way, the Senate takes that forward, something else can still happen, right, regarding that decision. The board may not accept the recommendation, or it might take longer to get to the agreement that they were hoping for on either side, or whatever. But you've got to have a process that people recognize and that they can feel confident in. Even if they don't like the outcomes, they believe in the process for getting there. And that's really crucial. So if you're going to have things on your agenda that's a first read, and then there's a second read where you take action, then folks have to know, this is a first read, this is my time to provide comment, ooh, I better go back and talk to my department or my division, get the feedback, because the Senate's gonna take action on this. We have to move forward. So that there's an understanding then that the decision's been made and it's gonna go forward and it's not coming back again, or perhaps there's a motion to delay one more month because this was midterms and nobody had an opportunity because everybody's busy grading, so we're, okay, granted, let's give it one more month, it's gonna come back, but then we're gonna take action and we need to support our Senate leaders in this direction and go forward. And, you know, that's the democratic process. You know, lots of decisions are made by votes that none of us are fully supportive of, but we have to live with those decisions until the next opportunity comes for us to elect or vote on a change. So there has to be a process there, and I think that would help somewhat, or at least a belief in the process.
Okay, so then what I heard you say, and I want to paraphrase just to make sure that I'm really hearing it clearly, is that when we have someone, so when you're talking about things like the Curriculum Instruction Committee, as you know, to be a chair of that committee is not a light task. They usually have to go through a number of years of training to be prepared for it. So that person kind of becomes like a content expert in that area. So we should be trusting a little bit in that content expert area to come report and feed into us, right? Is that what I've heard a little bit?
Yeah, I think that would be useful because they do have that content expertise. That's part of participatory governance, is getting the folks with expertise at the table.
Right, the reason that I'm asking is because oftentimes what happens is we have those people who come in, and then when it goes to the full Senate board, what will happen is that we'll override the people who have had that kind of content expertise. And what's a way that we might be able to facilitate that smoother process? Because I think that's one of the other areas of trust that we've seen breach a little bit.
Yeah, and that happens lots of times, lots of places, so I don't want you to think that's only unique here, because we do hear that from other folks. How do you get that trust in the people who are doing the work? Like the SLO coordinator comes in and says, here's what we have to do with SLOs, and everybody goes, nah, we don't have to do that. You know, and here they put all that work into it, and they're charged with that responsibility, and they've studied the accreditation documents or what the responsibilities are. So how can you help educate your senators on that is really the question. The people in the Senate who are going to vote, how do you do that? Well, does the information need to be more timely? Do the reports need to be more often? Does there need to be a special opportunity for people to meet with that individual to hear about it? Is it a written report? Is it an oral report? If you're just expecting people to go to their website and read the minutes on their own, probably not going to happen, even though there's so much goodwill there to say, hey, we made it all available to everybody because it's on our website, but typically people don't go there. They have to be led, read, and kind of fed all that information. So, that's a good conversation for the Senate to have, to say, geez, we've got these people working for us. How do we count on their expertise? How do we have them bring us a report that gives us the information we want so we can then make a good decision? And I would think the board is kind of thinking with those same ears. We have all these experts in the field. The Senate is one of our experts. We want to be able to get information from them in such a way that helps us be able to make good decisions. How does that happen? How do we get that? If the information is filtered, maybe that's not a good way for that to occur. How can it come directly so that there can be this sense that we feel empowered now because we've had good conversations and we've gotten good information? So I think that those are some questions that the Senate can wrestle with, and then they can also make those proposals to the board as that group that they want to ultimately inform about what's happening, what's going on there, what's on your agenda, what's coming up, what can we watch for in the near future in terms of possible policies or concerns. We're giving you a heads up. We would like to see this issue move more slowly because faculty haven't weighed in yet. So how do we communicate those kinds of things in a way that's healthy for communication? The reason we're doing this is to build goodwill. It's not to point fingers. It's not to, try to create greater angst. The purpose is for communication, and that's something that has to be on everybody's radar. I guess I don't want
primary responsibility is to make recommendations concerning curriculum and academic and professional matters to the Board of Trustees. But we often, and we do feel entirely frustrated, that we don't really have a venue of making those recommendations. So in the interest of this board, I think it would be very productive for us to really review some best practices. You mentioned a few, but they're more informal ones, about how the academic senate, the voice of the faculty, can have access to communicating with the Board of Trustees. And so perhaps you could address that, because I think that is a real problem on this campus.
Eduardo, did you give a regular report to the board at board meetings?
Yes, I do.
Okay, because I was going to mention that as a good avenue, and the law does give the Senate the opportunity to directly address the board on any given topic, typically under the 10+1. So maybe that report needs to be reshaped, expanded, I don't know.
Well, I think the problem that we're having is that say for example, I received a letter from the General Counsel saying that the Board of Trustees is aware of our feelings, our beliefs during public comment. And so to be able to simply express the activities of the Senate during public comment or during my report is, from the Senate's point of view, not enough. What we like to have is a report with the Senate, so that we can, with the Board of Trustees, so we can ask them questions, so we can get information from them, simply being a one-way conversation. And unfortunately, right now, the response is that there is a designee, President Rocha, and unfortunately, for various reasons, there's just a lack of confidence right now. So our preference is to speak directly to the Board of Trustees, to have a conversation, not simply say, these are the events the activities that are happening.
Is it agendized? Is it on the agenda, or is it not on the agenda, your report?
Well, I've tried to make several requests to be placed on the agenda, but I think out of the past 5 requests, they've all been denied with the statement that they're not operational in nature, so as such, the answer is no.
Yeah, well, I would encourage the board to actually agendize that and allow the Senate to have that conversation with you. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. It doesn't even have to be a conversation. It could just be a report that's identified on the agenda, where the board may be able to ask a couple of questions of the Senate President, because what that does is it builds rapport. It's not the time to negotiate mutual agreement, so I don't want that to occur. You don't want that happening in a board meeting. You want that to happen behind closed doors and, work it through and get everything, all the ducks in a row. But when the Senate President has the opportunity to address the board and takes advantage of that opportunity to share directly with the board about what's going on, what the resolutions were at plenary over the weekend, what's happening locally, what that does is help the board see what the Senate is doing and the value of the Senate and why the Senate might be engaged. So when a recommendation comes to you at some point, your reasons for accepting that recommendation come in a greater context. If there's a state Senate initiative to do this, it's not just Pasadena City College, or this is what we're hearing from accreditation about this topic. Wanted to let you know we're on top of that as a Senate. We've been creating transfer degrees, and wanted to let you know how this is happening with our Senate, and our faculty are engaged, and we've got this many in the pipeline, to let you know as board members that this is an important part of the work of the Senate, because board members, you have delegated that work to the Senate. They are working on your behalf. So to get that report back from them is a way to close that loop and to build kind of that communication there. So that would be one thing that I would encourage.
I would agree that it is a common practice to allow for informational report on the agenda. But I do agree with Beth that the board can choose how it wants to seek the input of those affected by its decisions. It's the best practice is to have one communicator presenting it to the board that can reference the positions of the other constituencies. Otherwise, it just gets unwilled. And I say one communicator, at times it may be the vice president of construction, maybe the superintendent president, maybe the academic senate president, that's actually doing a presentation and can then communicate what the positions of the others are, so that you don't have, every agenda item having, 6 speakers on it. So for informational reports, and I thought you said you do give.
Yes, I do.
There's a standing informational report.
Shared governance committees make the reports as an information.
Okay. And that's common practice. But having an interaction with multiple people on each agenda item is not. You do that through public comment and written materials provided to the board in advance. Generally.
I must say that there has been a thawing of relations between the board of trustees and the academic senate. President Trustees Fellows we now started having breakfasts, informal breakfasts, to have discussions. So that is a positive step.
Coming back from, when everybody does votes of no confidence, that is going to freeze up relations. And it's going to take a long time for those to thaw. And I get the passion behind that issue. People outside this room will decide whether it was done rightly or wrongly procedurally. But when we take things to that level, it's very hard to come back down. And we went through a period of time about 10 years ago where it was kind of a votes of no confidence were going kind of all over the state. And a lot of colleges, it took a long time to get past that.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm here because I would like to respond. First trustee, I think, has spoken, and I'm glad all the shared governance groups on the agenda. They make reports. There is an opportunity for the board to respond to reports, to ask questions if they want to. In the past, we've had Senate presidents who've given us Senate notes, I think they call them man notes or something, where they gave all kinds of information. So I think that I'm going to say, what I would like to ask, I have a couple of points. I'd like to ask Scott if he would respond to this, because I think that alluded to it, but I would like it specifically stated. How can the board respond to any kind of comment that's made on items not on the agenda? When some of the public comes and it doesn't matter who it is, and makes comments about something not on the agenda, what can the board do to that? I mean, it's on every agenda we have, but we keep hearing the board's not responsive. So could you respond to what we can legally do if someone brings up a topic that's not on the agenda?
A board should not take any steps that could be deemed deliberative on an issue that is not on the agenda. So you don't have to sit there and with duct tape over your mouth. You can say thank you for your feedback, or we'll agendize that in the future. But you should not take. It is a violation of the Brown Act to take any step that could be perceived to be as deliberative. Toward, meaning, contributing to a future decision. And, that's an issue over email, right now, where, with the council, boards can't send, a chain of emails where it's passed along to 3 different board members about something that might be on a future agenda. And the same is true just in the public comment.
I have 2 other really quick points. Okay. The second one is, I would like for you to comment. I know the answer to this, but I would like to comment on it. What happens when boards of trustees do not follow their own procedures? So, for example, I'm going to give something which I think is relatively non-controversial: redistricting. We have a policy. And by the way, I'm going to share the policy with you today. We have a policy on redistricting, and I think we followed it, to the minute. We actually hired the consultant recommended by the league, and I don't think we've had any challenge to that. But what could the consequences be, and not just in this particular business, but there's legal, but what could the consequences be if the board did not follow their own procedures, particularly by the accreditation commission? Would you comment on that?
There's 2 issues. Number 1, a decision could be required to be reversed. So if you make a decision not using either substantive or procedural policy, that decision could be ordered to be reversed by a judge. Or could be determined in grand jury court. Sometimes that's when you see grand juries investigate agencies. The accrediting commission certainly that would fall below an accrediting commission standard, and it could be, lead toward an adverse status or at least a recommendation.
And then my third one isn't a question, but it's a comment, if that's okay. One of the things that we are in the process of doing is developing a policy on civility. And the board meetings, I think, have been very lacking in civility. And from what I've heard, there's a lack of civility on campus. So I think the board members have tried to be civil in their response, and I would like to, I don't think we really should have to have a policy on civility, when this is a college campus. I think we should be able to discuss things in a reasoned and rational and civil manner. But I would like to urge everyone, until we get a policy, to pretend like it's there, and in our interactions with each other, you said, let's reset. Let's reset on that. Let's be civil with each other. You can say very damning things about people, but you can say in a civil way.
Principles of community are very important. Universities spend a lot of time developing them about how do we deal with each other. You may be familiar with the debate at Brandeis about whether to give an honorary degree to a scholar that's been critical of Islam, and a campus being torn apart by that. It takes a long time to heal these things. And the only people being hurt, you're not administrators or faculty or staff, you're not really being hurt on this process breaking down. The students sure are. When the board meetings aren't working right, and we're not having a collaborative discussion and working together for goodwill, the student and community perceives it. I read about what happens at PCC up in Sacramento. I got Google News. That's hurting this college. Your chance of building more buildings are being hurt by the perception of that lack of civility. And I'm not laying blame on any particular constituency, but don't think that this is just about disagreement among some current leaders on campus. This will have long-standing impacts if it continues. Over here, and then,
I just want to follow
on civility? Okay, quickly.
Yeah, and somebody else brought it up earlier. I recognize that there's a forum for faculty to address the board in a regularly scheduled meetings. But I also feel as a faculty member here that one of the reasons that some of this breakdown might be happening is that there is an enormous gap between your average garden variety faculty member and board members, because they don't know each other, they're not seeing them on campus, they're not seeing them in their programs as visits, there's not much interaction. And I think part of that is because the lack of civility is built up, but I think it's a feedback, and I think they don't know each other as people. There's a lot of paranoia on both sides, as you've heard being discussed. And to the extent that individual board members are able to make their way on the campuses, or individual faculty are able to engage board members and look what we're doing, I think that would go a long way to improving some of the situation.
Well, I'll be candid. I've been in a lot of very well-functioning colleges, and the last thing they want is board members on their campus. And I think that feeling is an outcome of all the other tensions, and that once we get past that, it's like, the things are fine. It's like, some boards pride themselves on the length of their board meetings. We had one board going until like 2 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, some of the best functioning districts in the state are in and out in an hour, and that includes dinner. So some of that will resolve itself over time, but it is important for the board to work together as a unit and to observe the leadership structure on campus.
Yeah, and I'll share a thought for all of you in terms of how to engage the board in a way that avoids the micromanagement aspects and all of that. What I've seen some colleges do with their boards, their districts, is somehow around the board meeting, either before or after, have tours of parts of the campus to see the latest and greatest of what's going on in a particular area, have presentations. They've even focused it on student success. So rather than do that scorecard like once a year, they take aspects of that and have a little presentation before the board meeting where the faculty in those areas can come in and talk about it. So there are other ways for this bridge to be built, so that the garden variety faculty member and classified person and, others who don't typically engage with the board can show off their work, and what they're doing to the board members if you incorporate that as part of the regular board meetings. And you guys certainly have a lot to show off here, so that would be one way that other districts have approached that.
Well, she kind of made the comment that I wanted to make. I think that a lot of the faculty members are doing a really good job here, and they're not so controversial. And the board, I think, only sees the more controversial situations. And I feel like the board and the administration does not respect the opinion of the garden variety faculty member. And I don't think there's a good feeling there, even when some of the things that you said were like, oh, faculty would be willing to have a schedule in the best interest of the student. I actually saw smirks going on back and forth between some of the board members and administrators. So I think there's this feeling like all faculty are evil or something, and I don't know how we're going to get past that. There is no trust and there is no goodwill. And to hear the board member here speak, that was really nice for me. I never get to hear the board members interact at all. I think that we need a little more give and take like that. I know the president is always willing to have us come sit in his office, and I appreciate that, and I've done that. But I don't really feel like he listened to what I say or took the advice for anything. It was just sort of like, check, you feel better, we'll go on. So I don't think that the faculty opinion is valued here at all. And I think we're kind of viewed at as being difficult, troublemakers, and I don't think that's true for most of us. I just wanted to say that. And I also wanted to ask you, do you ever see a school where it's gotten so bad there is no fix? Because I know a lot of faculty members are now getting to the point where they're saying, I don't think it can be fixed, I give up. I'm just going to focus on the class.
If City College of San Francisco can be fixed, then any college can be fixed. We've hit bottom in some places. I was up at Redwoods. It was Michelle. Yeah, 3 years ago or something. College of Redwoods. So do you know where Redwoods is? It's like you go to Washington State and make a left. No, it's way up there. A 6-hour drive, and it was, 6-hour drive and scheduled on a Monday. So it's like, I go up on Sunday, and I was okay for flying down last night. That's okay. But take up a whole Sunday, whole day or day and a half with them, and then drive home, get home 11 o'clock at night or something. And we're standing there, and the faculty said, academic senate, the academic senate leader, let's not generalize everybody, said, well, we think it's actually in the best interest of lose accreditation, because then we'll get rid of all our administrators. And I said, you lose your jobs, right? And here in Eureka, it's not like there are jobs growing on trees. And then I went after them personally, and I talked about losing a day at home. I could do gardening, I could do all of this, and we're willing to put work in this institution, and that's what's got to happen here too. Some work has got to be put in to repair the damage that's been done. Now let me tell you, Redwood's is actually in pretty good shape right now, and they have the most contentious faculty that I've seen at any college. They said, well, they just stopped attending committee meetings. They said, well, we decided we'll just grind governance to a halt by not going to committee meetings. We're going to boycott. Lessons learned there, it was about people and not process. We didn't have to redesign. San Francisco, we redesigned their whole committee structure and all of that. The college president, they had an interim when I was up there. The college president and the leaders buried some hatchets. And they're making some real tough decisions right now. They're closing the center in Fort Bragg. I mean, it's not like everything's beautiful and wonderful and therefore everybody's getting along. They're doing the tough work. But it really is about personality. It's about working, being committed to work together. Because you don't really have a choice. You can wait till somebody else is going to be a leader of this constituency or that constituency, but the history will remain unless you choose to make the change now. this analytics, a lot of stuff I've heard in the room, I heard many years ago under a previous president. Some of the stuff is just carried forward. No offense to Dr. Rocha. Doesn't matter who the president is if you just keep the same attitudes about the administration. Right? If you just think that it's a system, that's how it is. It's always adversarial. I can tell you, and Beth will tell you, that we go to colleges where it's not, where people are committed to working together. We go to, at Kern, they have us in the Kern district of Bakersfield College every year, and they boom it out. It's the biggest district in the state, 25,000 square miles, so they boom it out to all their sites, including Mammoth, just to have an annual discussion about how can we improve what's already a great process, and to have that discussion and relationships and show that everybody's on the same page. So it can happen. It's going to take some real hard work, and a lot of people kind of need to put their heads down a little bit and say, okay, we done wrong. What can we do right?
Those are all great ideas, Scott, and I completely agree. And having been I am from a district that had many no confidence votes, grand jury investigation, union that asked us to work to contract, very difficult times. For years, it was awful. And being the Senate president that had to deliver the first no confidence vote, because there were many, it became very clear that what a no confidence vote tells you is that there is no communication, and people have stopped being willing to talk to each other. And any place that is so dependent on human beings for the success cannot let communication die. It'd be like being in a relationship, a marriage, and saying you don't want to communicate anymore. And what is your only option? Then it's divorce. You're not in a place where divorce is an option. So no matter how bad that communication is that led to no confidence votes or worse kinds of actions that we've seen all over the state, and colleges do survive all of that stuff, but it really, really takes an effort to want to talk again. And that means that there has to be an avenue for those conversations to take place. And they don't have to be giant to start with. They can be very small. Finding some common ground. Like, okay, 10,000 things that are wrong, but there might be one that's right. What is it? Find it. And start there with building some common ground. If your scorecard looks great in some area where you can just be so thrilled about that, then start there. And let's talk about how do we even improve it more. Don't get, stressed about trying to improve some of the things that might take more work or might be more contentious. But finding that place where there's some common ground that can be a starting point. And that could be within constituencies first, and then across constituencies, because it might be that some constituencies need to reach out to each other and find ways to build a bridge that hasn't existed or could exist or could be stronger in different ways. So I feel your pain. I have been there. I so understand how awful that is, and having to stand in the shoes of the Senate president and a garden variety faculty member, a union member, you know how hard it is. So it really, really takes an effort. And we're willing to help you find those places where there might be a crack where you can start. But there has to be commitment to doing it from all sides too.
And maybe the next resolution, next resolution of the academic senate needs to be something along the lines of, the new day. Next communication from the college president may need to be along those lines, to start doing all of it. I really agree with what Beth said in terms of the first conversation being, the resolution within the Senate about empowering the leadership of the Senate to start this new day. Because I know it's tough to be in a political position and have the troops behind you saying, go, 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 and then what is my latitude? You need to give a latitude to this president to change relationships, and the other leaders to change relationships, to make an active effort. Because right now, my sense is everybody rushes back, sits at their computers, and starts firing off missiles. A friend of mine became a college president at a great college, but had a really bad dean, I think. Everybody, this guy's awful. And the academic senate was ready to do a resolution no confidence vote. And so my friend gets the job, knows that this guy's a problem, and calls in the academic senate leadership, sits him down and says, doing this will just hurt this otherwise great institution. Give me a year to solve this problem. And this is a tough one in terms of, possible lawsuits and everything if you just move the person out. So just give me a year. And if I haven't done something that you're satisfied with, do the no confidence vote against it. And he bought a year and he fixed the problem. And that's the kind of hard work it takes. And the willing to put yourself on the line in order to avoid going down the wrong path. I wish we could have been here, a few years ago and avoided some of the tensions that rose that has colored every single comment and question we've heard today. This isn't about stuff that's going on today. This is about stuff in the past. And as I mentioned, some stuff in the past from previous college presidents.
Super, I was sitting brief. I'm David Hewitt, I teach rigor. I think I see it as a church battle. I don't see it as a bunch of fussy faculty who get yourself a student stroke. Like, no fair, we're going to do that. At least from what I can see, the faculty through the Senate is really willing and eager to work with the board of trustees and cooperate, communicate. And I don't see it as an emotion. So like, we're upset because this didn't happen. We are upset, but those things did happen. We are stuck with the baggage and the wreckage of all that.
You said something that just showed the exact problem. The job of the academic senate is the college district or multi-college district is not to work with the board of trustees. The board of trustees has a legal responsibility to step back and allow the policy development to happen and then consider it when it comes to that. So I understand the person.
So collegially, it's the board of trustees. And so collegially?
No, I'm willing to, we do sometimes disagree. When we're using language about reaching mutual agreement, that, yes, the board of trustees may be making the final decision, but the path to that mutual agreement should be through, or should be on campus in between board meetings, and that's with the college president, other administrative leaders, other constituency groups. And that's just a fundamental disagreement I have with the role of the Senate, understanding that at the end of the day, there is that decision.
Yeah, and I appreciate that sense that it's the board and the Senate that have to reach mutual agreement. However, it's rarely the board that you're actually reaching the mutual agreement with the first time out the gate. What you're doing is you're working with the board's designee, whoever the board has placed in charge of that particular issue or whatever the structure is. That's where the Senate's going to work first to get the mutual agreement, and then that goes up to the board as a recommendation where the mutual agreement on their side, they have put a designee there to represent them in negotiations or in that mutual agreement process with the Senate, so that you don't want to wait to reach mutual agreement at a board meeting. That's not where the negotiation would be taking place. So I hope that that was not an issue we should have addressed earlier in trying to help understand how the process would work, but that's typically how anybody with mutual agreement in the state, those conversations and all that hard work and, you know, editing documents and trying to find out what everybody is good with happens before you get to that.
And the perfect analogy, in our roles, we're on consultation council. We have a discussion, the state body, consultation council, we have a discussion with the chancellor and vice chancellors. And then the chancellor is the one that presents it to the board of governors. Now, we have an opportunity during public comment to say we vehemently disagree, although all the work has been done, that very rarely happens. The parties around the consultation council table, our relationship, our policy development relationship is with the chancellor. And if we're constantly going to the board of governors, and the analogy is perfect to hear, what we're saying is we have zero confidence in our college president. So in that comment, in this discussion, I think you're right back to where we were a few years ago. You've got to have confidence. And if you say you don't have confidence in the college president, you're saying you don't have confidence in anybody else in administrative roles. And I know, you know, and I've talked to many of you, I know that's not the case. But we have to think about this. This is something that you don't just read a presentation and then, okay, it's over. We have to really think about our roles in this process and how we interact with each other. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but it was a good conversation.
Did you have another question?
Just that it's not feelings from you like the boss, it's one track record. And it's not a church battle, like it's not just being emotional about feeling our toes stepped on. We want things to work as much as the next person.
Let me defer to Trustee Shelton.
I'm Ross Selvage, and I'm the new trustee on the board.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Still learning a number of things. I've been to a couple of the programs that the league's put on. I wanted to make a comment about the Brown Act. I've been on Brown Act bodies for not this board for over 15 years at one time or another. In the public comment for items not on the agenda, this would make clear out the meeting to the meeting, trustee and all that. It is permissible for members of the Brown Act body to ask certain clarifications in certain elaborations so that they understand the comments that's being made. I also understand you can't get into sort of disguising deliberations, but it is okay for a trustee to ask them for clarification if they're making statements to the board. The other thing is I'm all in favor of civility, but when I ran for election, I knew that if I was elected and I'm sitting here on the board, people say things that I don't like about me, I can't stop them. You know, they're going to be disruptive, if they're going to disrupt the meeting or something like that. But as far as saying things that I don't like to don't want to hear about what I've done or me personally, that's fair game, and we just move on. That's done. Civility is the only way to accomplish things in these types of deliberations. So my specific questions.
Listen, on the Brown Act, let me just clarify. So if somebody in the public came forward and said, you've got a building on campus, it's a fire trap. And that's all he said. Can you identify, sir, what building you're talking about? That's totally permissible. Or then, I ask it when Jeanette says, okay, well, we pledged that we're going to fix that building next week. That's when you're moving beyond asking clarifying questions to deliberation.
The questions like that kind of revolve around the 10 plus 1 and the mutual agreement versus relying primarily. Back on the slide you had the first 4 of 10 plus 1, right there. The educational program development. Now, a lot of the terminology, because I'm new, is a little amorphous and
no, seasoned people.
That's always amorphous. Okay. How convenient. But that gave an example of an educational program that we might not think, or a program that we might not think is an educational program. You mentioned student aid or something, but rather than giving us only an example of something that isn't, or something that we might not think is an educational program that is, Can you give us a couple of examples of programs that aren't educational, that we don't have to say hello to the faculty, senate, or students, or whatever? Or are there such?
And this is one that there aren't definitive rules on. And sometimes Beth, and I'm sure I do it to her, she wanders out to the plank a little bit, and I get a little bit nervous, and vice versa. But it comes down to, we have a law from 1988, and then you have accreditation standards that have come forward that have broadened the definition of programs. And so under the accreditation concept of educational programs, it is that very broad sense. Now, I don't think we have time to show those examples.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did that, because it was a trick question if you didn't get it.
So here's an example, faculty professional development, and how do you do that? Because it's another one, but it could be part of an educational program as well. So maybe it's a faculty leadership development program for administrator. You're trying to grow your own leaders on campus. That's some kind of a program you put together. You want to have faculty engagement. But let's say it was a classified professional development program. Would the faculty need to weigh in on that? Anything having to do with students, it's going to be hard to find a program that is not going to engage the faculty. Financial aid has a lot of issues right now, especially potentially losing the BOG fee waiver for some students, how it's tied to enrollment priorities. There are some really big issues with financial aid that need to have counselors involved, maybe some other individuals. Maybe you're going to put together a peer tutoring, mentoring program for some students in financial aid, and who's going to be leading that? It might be faculty, it might be financial aid folks. So I just threw that one in there because it's not the typical educational program that people think about, and our counselors are sometimes not included in the whole flock of faculty. And so I don't want you to forget that if counselors are leading some of these programs, those are also faculty then led programs.
What about a marketing program, marketing plan? Now, I'm going to say that, but you should also have a culture where you have some sort of college council, and if you're going to do a major endeavor, it's run by, the constituency groups, even though it's not subject to 10+1.
I didn't think it was going to be an easy question. Sort of along the same lines, organizational reason, legal, fiscal, or organizational reason for the board saying, this is just how it's going to be done. This is how we have to do it, because it's for the good of the college and students. Can you give a couple of examples of organizational reason?
Well, the example I used earlier was if the academic senate came forward and said, we want to go to plus or minus grade. The students objected because they thought it was going to interfere with the transfer. And the research office actually came back and said, well, transfers are going to go down. I think that would be a compelling organizational reason. I don't want to get too far down the road since it's a current issue, but it was talked about in the question of how do you structure chairs versus deans. Now, that issue, the court decision on that was based on number 6, district and college governance structures related to faculty roles, and that was read narrowly as to applying to committee processes, the processes for consultation, that sort of thing. Another organizational, maybe let's just say the faculty really don't want you to go out for a bond. I mean, I could be a financial reason, but let's say the faculty didn't want a bond for some reason. That might be something we say, okay, what's a compelling organizational reason? Now, the one that's used most often is accreditation. But that's a legal and fiscal, so they overlap.
I don't have any.
agreement rely primarily on different approaches, and some colleges operate under one, some colleges operate under another. I think that gave an example or talked about if you are operating under a rely primarily, there are areas where you might, the board might say, well, we're going to operate under mutual agreement in these areas. Okay? However, if a college is operating under a mutual agreement, what is the process by which it changes to a rely primarily arrangement?
That would actually be...
We're going the other way.
Now, this is an interesting one, because the law says the board chooses. That, I think, would be under number 6, that faculty, district and college governance structures as related to faculty roles. So I think there would be an obligation to at least have that conversation, but I think there is some conflict in law there. Would you agree?
Yeah, I kind of feel like that boards do that usually when the college is beginning. You know, like we've launched some new colleges and multi-college districts, and you know, the boards have that conversation about how they want to work with that new senate. Once that's established, your faculty are working under that relationship that you've, already put out as the structure. So to change it would be, you have to have the uber compelling organizational, fiscal, legal reasons why you want to change that. Or it might be the faculty might propose it. They may bring a proposal to the board to say, we've been under mutual agreement for all of the 10+1, but we'd like to have curriculum. Just that one, because it is singled out in the law, that the faculty are responsible for curriculum. We'd like to have rely primarily on that. Would the board consider that proposal? And so it might come from the faculty as opposed to coming from the board as a possible change. But I think to make a change either way, you guys would have to have really a lot of reasons as to why the current system wasn't working or wasn't effective for you.
Could I just comment on one a long time? At one time, we did change. And I can't remember. I just remember the change. So we had, I think we had partial and partial.
Oh.
And so we had a president who will be unnamed, who got along very, very well with the faculty. And so we decided, sure, let's move to agreement. I think that's what happened, but I do know we did.
Yeah, in well-functioning districts or colleges, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it says, rely primarily, you have to provide a written rationale. Well, we always say it should be in writing when there's a disagreement and mutual agreement as well, so. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, I wanted to thank you, Beth, and I'm not closing this off at all. If there are others who want to take the mic and ask you questions. I think we're supposed to be here at 1 o'clock, but I'm all too happy to give you a break and head towards lunch, which is ready. But first of all, thank you very much for going 3.5 hours without a break. And so we need but I also want to thank both of you from the bottom of my heart for how much I think you all learned today. And I think probably the wisest thing, among many wise things that we've said, at least in scope community, was how no matter the difficulties of the past, we need to find some way to move forward. And I said in my 5 things video this morning, I kind of do 5 things to know for the week. This is Easter week, and whether you're a Christian or Jew, Passover one. Yesterday was Palm Sunday. This is just a season of hope and rebirth. So we need to find some way to move forward. And I also have to say that President Harris, I agree with him. I agree with him on many, many things. We have agreed for all the difficulty of this year on many issues. We're starting to cap them again. The dialogue is starting to open up again. Recently, the Senate, in terms of extremely important policy, the bachelor's degree came forward and brought that recommendation forward. And of course, that was sustained by the board trustee. So I wouldn't call it, just a complete love project, but I do think there is enough fabric to be moving forward. And so with that, of course, I prefer to ask that question, but I wanted to express my thanks and to all my colleagues, faculty, staff, and also students who are all here to serve. My deep optimism and hope that we'll be able to move forward. So thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott.
Well, and thank you and to all the other leaders in particular, because hopefully you found some of my words difficult to hear across the board. And that's an important part of this. That's like experience therapy earlier. And that one's come up a few times. And it can be difficult to hear, to listen. So I certainly appreciate you all doing that. If there are any further questions, we're happy to answer. If not, yes.
What's the next step? Do you stay around or come back, or how does that work?
We're at your disposal. If you would like us to come back, that's great. I'm planning to be here for a little while for lunch. I think Scott is too. So if there are other questions that you have or other concerns that we might be able to help with,
we did not structure, we have different structures for you. We did not structure this one. In discussion, it was coordinated by the Academic Senate President and the President. We didn't structure separate meetings with constituencies leading to a formal report. We want to start off this way. But if that decision is made in the future, we're happy to come back down also.
yeah, we've been invited back to some colleges. I don't know whether that's because they liked us or hated us. But it is possible to have us back. We're always willing to help try to find ways for colleges to do what they want to do and find ways to give you the tools that you need to be able to do that, whether that's understanding the law or understanding the options. That's something that we can provide. It may feel like we didn't give you very many options today, or options that are very difficult or challenging, but you are in a very challenging place. So that means your options may be by nature very challenging or not very desirable. Have to write letters to the chancellor's office, or work with legal counsel, or even try to find different ways to approach resolutions through the Senate. Maybe none of that is what you want to do or what you thought might be your options at this point. So it requires some soul searching. I don't know if we help with that or hurt with that, but we have been to some places where there have been similar challenges to what you're facing here. So we're coming from a place of experience. Sometimes that experience is helpful, and sometimes it's not really what you wanted to hear. So, any other?
Well, I was talked, candidly about the threat that I think this continuing has to this institution. And I hope that you heard that. I also want you to know that Pasadena City College has an unrivaled reputation around the state. I mean, we're kind of like Wobegon. We love all of our children. They're all above average. I say that honestly. That it is truly recognized, and while some of us see more news clippings than others, I don't think this is widely known around the state, but it will be, and you have a chance to put an end to that as we move forward. I would also note we do recommend that the governance leadership team of each constituency have an annual retreat day. A few hours, it could just be a few hours, get some sandwiches, and just talk over the process and how it's working. And do confidential self-evaluations about how it's working are good to get the different perspectives. So short of even us coming back, there are some institutional things you can do that are just about the process going forward.
I just wanted to briefly comment. So, you mentioned a couple of things, whether it's the Senate doing a resolution, say it's a new day, whether it's the President coming to the memo on things to the subject. I think we're at the point where none of the constituent groups, it seems like, want to blink. And so someone's got to blink first. And so I don't know who that's going to be. I'm just throwing it out there that someone is going to have to blink for this to move forward. Someone's going to have to take that first step before someone will take their first step. And I hope that when we leave the room, that the constituent groups that are still here will really think about that and maybe consider blinking. Maybe they'll blink at once, and that would be a great start. That would be helpful.
And there are some things you can do together that show a real strong message to the folks that aren't in this room today. There are far more people at this institution that aren't in this room today but know of the tensions that have been expressed in here. And you can do something together. It doesn't have to be kumbaya, but just to send a message that it is a new day.
I'm not sure I need to say new day.
Oh, I thought you were going to sing.
That sound like singing? I apologize, because my voice is not that good. But the message could be a common message that says, we have heard some thoughts and ideas about where we are today. We want together to see where we can go. It may be that the different organizations have to think about that before they want to put a joint message out. I think if it's a message from individual constituencies, that's not going to be as powerful as something that could come out from everybody. So that may take some time for people to get there. And I just want to point out, I know people often want the Senate to come in with a big hammer. We don't have a hammer like unions have a hammer. Unions can take things to court and take things to law and take things to PERB and can argue the contract. And the Senate is not an organization that typically has the power of law behind it to come in here and encourage a lawsuit or something like that from the faculty perspective. And you can do it. Lots of Senates have, and mine did. But it usually doesn't prove to be as effective, but it can make you feel good, like you're doing something. So part of this is, where do you need to be? If you're at a place where you still feel like you need to do something to challenge what's been happening, then that may still need to occur. But I also want you to know that what will likely happen is it will come back and they will say redo it. Just go back through that process. So you can save yourself a lot of money without the lawyers and without the court by doing that anyways. Who can ask to have some of that stuff redone now before you have to go to all the expense of the attorneys to make that happen? So just wanted to make sure that you understand where there is legal basis and where there is support from a legal perspective for some of these things. And if you choose to go down that legal route, there are questions about how you fund something like that. As Scott mentioned, some individuals from Senates have been on the hook for the entire cost of those legal proceedings themselves. And that's a consideration with any kind of legal process. So that's kind of a yucky thing. But on the new day side, if you can get there, what constitutes the new day at this point? Are you still partly in a solar eclipse of the new day? Or is it a full sun that's out there? Figure out what you can do to get to, and when you're ready. You can't make people come to a table moving forward unless they're ready to do that as well. And I appreciate that takes time and healing. And so I just want to offer that as well.
It can be as simple as the tone of the comments at the next board meeting. What tone is used? It doesn't say you have to support everything the board's doing, but just changing the tones.
To me, it feels like, and I've heard analogy like this before, for here at CCC. It's like we're married, we have a relationship, but there's some kind of, I don't know, contractual agreements, but really it's all about relationships. And so it feels like as some of us feel that we've been violated. So maybe we've been cheated on, for example, to use this analogy. How do we go on from there? Do you continue to put trust in each other, and when you've been constantly, or feel like you've been constantly violated in various ways? So in my mind, I mean, at some point, there's only so much we can do from one side, from the I don't know if there's a word for it, from the underrepresented side for us to do and just keep getting violated, or what can we do? So I think this is kind of a first step, kind of like a informative mediation counseling type thing, and then I just don't know, I mean, in ways, just relationships, and maybe sometimes different people have to get involved, and different people work better with others.
This was the introductory session with your therapist. Next time the cost goes up. You've all, if you've been listening, you've all lost something today. I mean, I went through a whole laundry list of allegations, and I listened to allegations from several sides. Some were right and some were plain wrong. And we gave you the tools to determine right and wrong today. I know we didn't answer everyone in specificity. In some cases, it's just there's not enough facts and that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing we do sometimes, of coming in and lay out the entire written record, and we can say who was right, who was wrong. I don't think that's actually all that helpful. It's usually going down the pathway of having a therapist hire an investigator to go see if there were any other wrong stuff. They've got the tools. It's going to take a certain contriteness to get past, the tension that came into this room today. Relationships can be healed if you have common goals and common visions, and that's what I like to get back to. Not returning to the issues, and should we redo each of these right away? We need to step up to some higher level, aspirational discussions about the future of this college and what you're doing and what your role is. As I mentioned, the budget's going to be great. We're dumping money on you. Turn that frown upside down. Let's talk about some of those, let's talk about a living achievement gap and what that means, and then return to some of the more difficult issues. I think that's where you find common ground. It's better to start with common ground than to start with the areas of disagreement.
Just really quick, when I say that, I think of history repeats itself. So I'm very reticent about just moving forward and not looking at the issues, because those issues have repeatedly, as you probably heard enough today, that they just come back again and again and again. So there is a danger of just looking the other way, but we do need to proceed. So it's just finding a balance.
Yeah, and I would add that when you're in that relationship one-on-one, where there's a loss of trust, that the trust has to be built back between those two people to make it work, or something else often have to happen. But when you're in a situation like this, you have other constituents. You have all of the people who heard what happened today through this whole big dialogue today. So while my trust may be so totally shattered that I don't even want to be in the room with somebody because I feel so bad, and that may be my sense of being violated or abused, or any of those very challenging situations. Maybe there's somebody else here who is not at that just point of no return, who can do something positive, who take up something in a positive way. And I know that might be challenging, but person is going to make any of this work by themselves. You're going to have a whole team of people, and it's got to be the people that still have a place where they can draw from with some energy and something to give. Because if you feel like you've been completely violated, you don't feel like you have anything else that you can give. And so, who are the people that can still come to the table and do that? And if you are still entrusting your leaders to do that, then you need to support your leaders in a big way and encourage them and support them to go to the table, because they may not want to go. They may be at that place where they can't give anymore. And so how do you get them back to the table and be at a place where they have to have that conversation in a place where there has not been trust before?
And I have seen a point of no return. I haven't seen that today. So I do know what it looks like. And point of no return went from one. I saw point of no return twice, actually.
How can we ensure that policies get followed? The policies are there to help us.
You know, in doing it in a collaborative manner. I mean, I mentioned before, if you think a process wasn't followed, you think something was subject to 10+1, you know, put it in writing, but do it in a respectful way. You know, we really think we should have had an input on this. Can you respond as to why you think it was not subject to 10+1, or why the policy was followed, but it didn't seem like it was followed? And in some cases, some of this stuff just happens by mistake. You know, half the time students think that they, you know, half the time students think they were consulted on something. I usually say this in presentation, but you know, it's not an obligation to make sure that all constituencies provide their feedback. The obligation is on the constituency. So I've heard students, I may have been one over the years, we never heard about this, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And there's like, you know, a mailbox with a stack of memos that just haven't been picked up. So, you know, mistakes can happen, and you only learn about mistakes by talking to each other rather than, can you believe so-and-so did this?
Yeah, I'm a big policy follower. That really bugs me. Policies not followed or processes not followed, because that's all Senate's have. You look at all those 10+1 things, it's that process of policy. So when that's not followed, oh God, no wonder you guys feel bad. Because that's all you have to really, you know, hold on to. It says you need to work on the process, and then you want to implement it. So of course you're going to feel like you got stabbed in the back when that doesn't happen. So when those things come up, again, this is going to take, you know, maybe a different timeline for communicating about these issues. And if it comes up, the question has to be, how are we going to engage people? What process are we going to use to make this recommendation or this decision? Which policies of ours apply? And get that into the lexicon of how we do this stuff so that we can make decisions and we can engage people, and then the trust can start to come back and people know, oh, we're going to use this process and this policy. Okay, I know what those are about. That engages my committee, or it doesn't engage my committee. I don't have to do that work this time. But there has to be somebody with radar saying, all this stuff is coming across my radar. How do I get that message out to people? Or this is the process I want to use. I pulled out policy, whatever number it is, and said this is the one that applies to what we're going to do here. So we have a process.
You know, the other, you know, I mentioned the mistake issue. Also understand, I know you have some new senior level administrators, and you'll have more. You know, leadership changes, and particularly the leadership changes among colleges. All these colleges have different processes and procedures. I've seen, you know, a vice president of instruction get in trouble because they were just following the process from their old college, and they had moved colleges. And so having that open discussion and asking for clarifications, sometimes you may learn that somebody in good, you know, total good faith made something that you saw as a grievous mistake.
Let me begin by saying that I found the presentation, your words to be very constructive, very beneficial, and I want to thank you for that. I'm sure that everyone else in the room feels the same way. For all the rest of the PC employees that weren't able to make it today, we'll make sure to send out an email asking to look at the video, and they too can find the same benefits as we did here.
Except they can watch it an hour and
right. Well, really. I also like to extend, on behalf of the executive committee, we would more than like to meet with the board of trustees at any time, formally, informally. And I like the idea of having the various shared governance committees here. We can also get together, discuss our common grounds, and once we do, then as shared governance, or participatory governance, we can also then meet with the administration and try to find those common grounds and build upon what we already have that's positive, because there are positive things ongoing on this campus. We do have a tremendous student body, and help them graduate, increase our transfer rates, and then build upon that and gradually begin to remove the various obstacles that we have. So once again, I want to thank you.
Thank you all very much.